Lord of Mysteries, The Fool Brother is a Witch. By Tuozhang de Yizhe. Chapter 151-175. No matter how Alger thought about it, he couldn't understand why the fool would send two of his beyonders. Simply killing Qilangos wouldn't require it. Could it be, there were others present at the time? Suddenly, Alger's thoughts immediately found direction and gradually became clear. He realized he had fallen into a mental trap. Archbishop Seigneur's preliminary judgment was at least two high-sequence beyonders, which meant the possibility of other high-sequence beyonders being present couldn't be ruled out. Although Alger wasn't clear about the specific situation, he knew that Qilangos also had a hidden organization behind him. If that were the case, a cold sweat broke out on Alger's back. This was a secret confrontation between two hidden organizations. And Qilangos was merely a sacrifice. In an instant, Alger's mind went blank, and his breathing stopped for a moment. Qilangos, Rear Admiral, the Hurricane Qilangos, a Sequence 6 Beyonder, the owner of the Creeping Hunger, this existence that weighed on Alger, could only be a pawn casually thrown out in front of true powerhouses. Alger quietly clenched his hand, but then, fearing his abnormality would be noticed, he quickly released it. If I betrayed Mr. Fool. Alger shivered, thinking of Qilangos's tragic and bizarre death. He knew his fate might be even more miserable than Qilangos's. He was already on this ship, with no way to leave. So he could only offer loyalty and value. Tingnan. Last night, Klein didn't receive any follow-up on the Qilangos incident. It was understandable that Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man, affected by the Qilangos incident, had their actions hindered and didn't dare to contact him rashly. But the lack of news from Mr. Azek and Old Sister was somewhat unexpected for Klein. However, with Eve present, there certainly wouldn't be any problems, and Klein wasn't worried. Thinking this, Klein boarded the trackless public carriage bound for Zuideland Street. Extra. Rear Admiral, the Hurricane, Qilangos was killed in Backland. Extra. Rear Admiral, the Hurricane, Qilangos was killed in Backland. The newsboy's voice came from outside the carriage. Klein paused, immediately took a 1-penny coin from his pocket, handed it through the window to the newsboy, and bought a copy of the Tingnan Morning Post. Opening the newspaper, Klein immediately saw the headline news. Great pirate Qilangos killed by Duke's bodyguard in Backland. Qilangos is dead. Was it Eve, or Mr. Azek? Or both of them together? Thinking of this, a strange feeling arose in Klein's heart. Two angels collaborating to kill him, that's a really high-tier setup. Many demigods probably don't get such special treatment. Though Qilangos wouldn't have wanted such special treatment. Klein silently said in his heart. As the mastermind behind this matter, I only learned the result from a newspaper. The news about Qilangos wasn't long, and Klein quickly understood the general course of events, though he didn't know how much of it was true. He put down the newspaper and looked around the carriage. Most people who could ride public carriages recognized words. Influenced by the newsboys, extra, many had bought the Tingnan Morning Post, and some acquaintances were conversing softly. Long ago, pirate kings and generals endangered shipping lanes, but he is the first great pirate to be killed by the government. Frankly, I'm very curious what he was doing in Backland. Storms above, I just want to know which of Duke Negan's bodyguards killed Qilangos. His bounty was a full £10,000. £10,000. Klein's eyes widened instantly, his thoughts somewhat dazed. Even with his current generous salary, he would need more than 10 years, without eating or drinking, to save £10,000. As the mastermind, can I get a share? Just a little bit would be enough. Klein thought silently in his heart, but he also knew this was impossible. Disappointed, he folded the newspaper and looked out the carriage window. Backland, in an apartment. A black cat, with a newspaper in its mouth, jumped onto the windowsill and entered the house through the window. She placed the newspaper from her mouth on the sofa, jumped off the sofa, shook her body, and meowed twice towards Hugh and Furz's room. Rui. Hugh opened the door and came out, but there was no reaction from Furz's room. Rui guessed she hadn't woken up yet. After a few days of getting along, Rui had learned Furz's personality. Look at today's newspaper. Rui Rui raised her paw, pointing to the newspaper on the sofa, and said. Hugh was startled, ran in small steps to the sofa, and picked up the newspaper. Opening the newspaper, the large headline news immediately caught Hugh's eye. Great pirate Keelangos killed by Duke's bodyguard in Backland. Keelangos is dead. Hugh was stunned, both bewildered and shocked. They had been guarding against a possible reverse pursuit from Keelangos, but they hadn't expected the next piece of information about him to be his death. Since Keelangos has been killed, I must also leave. After Rui Rui finished speaking, she jumped out the window and disappeared from Hugh's sight in an instant. Rui Rui's voice suddenly pulled Hugh back to reality. She opened her mouth, about to say thank you, but found that Rui Rui was already gone. In Sherwood Borough, Backland, the always dim apartment was finally bathed in sunlight. After Rui Rui and Eve left, the clone Eve left in Backland would occasionally open the curtains, letting sunlight into the house. Eve returned to her house in Backland, enjoying the rare brightness of sunlight in this sunny home. But Rui Rui didn't like it. As a vampire cat, she wasn't afraid of sunlight but disliked it intensely. Returning home only to find it filled with the sunlight she hated was truly an unpleasant experience. Eve saw obvious disdain on the cat's face, whose mouth couldn't be seen. She chuckled softly and reached out to close the curtains. She hadn't opened the curtains for a long time, it had become a habit. Even when Rui Rui went to Backland to protect the two wild beyonders and wouldn't return for a while, Eve didn't pull back the curtains. She only occasionally opened the curtains of the house where her clone resided long-term. Actually, after the two sought Rui Rui's help, Miss Audrey told her that she had two friends in danger and hoped Eve could provide protection, willing to pay the corresponding price. However, at that time, the two had already contacted Rui Rui, so she didn't agree, only saying she needed to consider it. Then, at their next meeting, she rather mystically told her that her two friends were already out of danger. Eve picked up Rui Rui and gently stroked her small head. The soft cat fur brushed against her palm, a very pleasant sensation. Chapter 150, Oh God, Look Upon Me. Tingnan, Captain, I'd like to apply for a special promotion, Klein said with a serious expression. Dunn, holding a newspaper, paused, a hint of surprise on his face. Promoted so quickly. Dunn put down the newspaper. Klein glanced at it, seeing a large headline, Great Pirate Keelangos Killed by Duke's Bodyguard in Backland. Dunn said with emotion, You truly are a genius. I'll write the application for you. Also, I'd like to apply to become a Red Gloves, Klein continued. Red Gloves. Dunn paused, picked up the pipe on the table and stroked it. The Red Gloves are an elite Nighthawks team. The danger level is much higher than that of ordinary Nighthawks. Are you sure you've thought this through? Yes, I'm sure. Klein nodded firmly. Dunn sighed and said, Talented young people like you and Leonard certainly have a better future in the Red Gloves. If you've truly decided, write the application after you've advanced to Sequence 7. This application must be written by you personally. I'm already prepared, Klein said, taking out a file bag and handing it to Dunn. Dunn was momentarily stunned, then took the file bag, shook his head, and chuckled, It seems you've truly made up your mind. Your time on the job is too short, but with your promotion speed, it shouldn't be difficult to join the Red Gloves, Dunn said. I hope you pass the assessment smoothly. I'll do my best. Klein tried to force a smile. After reporting to his captain, Klein left Dunn's office and stayed at Blackthorn Security Company until the afternoon before returning home. Upon arriving home, Klein locked himself in his room. Incarnation of disaster. Master of the mirror world. Symbol of joy and suffering. I'm about to advance to Sequence 7. Klein sat on a wooden chair, his hands clasped in prayer, his forehead resting on them, appearing extremely devout. After praying, he didn't immediately open his eyes. Instead, he took 2 deep breaths before slowly opening them. On the table were several books and notebooks, a fountain pen lay horizontally in front of Klein, and next to the pen was an ugly metal figurine. Klein lowered his gaze, staring intently at the metal figurine. After a long while, he withdrew his gaze, slowly lowered his head, covered his eyes with his hands, and pressed tightly. Klein could clearly feel his palms slowly becoming moist, tears clinging to his eyelashes, a very uncomfortable sensation. Narcissus Street, in another apartment. Eve received Klein's prayer. She understood what this message meant. Eve sighed deeply, and the surrounding environment instantly became intensely vibrant, whites whiter, reds redder, but the oil painting world only lasted a few short seconds before everything returned to its original state. Rui looked up at Eve in confusion. What's wrong? We're leaving, Eve murmured, stroking Rui. Because of the Kilangos incident, Justice and Hanged Man both took leave, so Klein simply cancelled this week's tarot club. On the first day that the Earl returns, tickets went on sale. Klein, Melissa, and Benson went to buy tickets together. The Earl Returns, a famous play adapted from a work by Rosal, was very popular, and there were an unusual number of people at the ticket booking site. After a long wait, Klein and his siblings finally stood before the ticket seller. 3 tickets, Benson said, holding up 3 fingers. Thank you very much. The ticket seller took the banknotes Benson handed over, unfolded them one by one, confirmed them, and then smiled as she handed 3 tickets to Benson. Melissa's eyes sparkled as she gazed at the tickets in Benson's hand, a hint of longing in her expression. Benson noticed Melissa's gaze, a smile in his eyes, and handed the tickets to Melissa. Melissa, you keep them. Okay. Melissa carefully took the tickets, raised her hand, wanting to touch them, but then worried if the ink had dried, if it would smudge, and if it smudged, would they be unable to enter. In the end, Melissa only lightly touched the air above the tickets, carefully pinching the 2 corners of the tickets with both hands, examining them repeatedly, her eyes full of anticipation. Benson and Klein looked at Melissa's cautious demeanor, their eyes filled with tenderness. You can safely put them in your pocket, Melissa, Klein said. The ink on the tickets has dried. Melissa carefully placed the tickets in the pocket of her dress, her hand lightly resting on the pocket, preventing them from being stolen by a thief or accidentally falling out. Let's go to the cathedral. Benson glanced at Melissa's hand on her pocket, then withdrew his gaze and said. They had all changed into their going out clothes today, thinking that since they were out, they might as well go to St. Selena Cathedral for Mass. Melissa and Klein nodded and went to the roadside to wait for the public carriage. Throughout the journey, Melissa seemed a bit nervous. Klein understood Melissa's feelings very well. He was the same when he got his first salary, always feeling like someone would jump out and rob him the next second. Melissa, let me keep the tickets, Klein said, raising his cane. If a thief tries to steal our tickets, I'll hit him hard with my cane. Then I'll keep them, Benson chuckled, because I can hit thieves with more force. In Melissa and Benson's eyes, Klein was a bookworm, though he had changed somewhat after finding a job. Melissa pursed her lips, took the tickets from her pocket, and handed them to Benson. Amidst the siblings' jokes, the carriage arrived before them. The 3 boarded the carriage and arrived at St. Selena Cathedral. The Moretti family were all followers of the Evernight goddess. Although the Moretti siblings were not devout believers, they would attend Mass every so often and had long memorized the procedures by heart. Klein sat between Benson and Melissa, his peripheral vision catching Melissa and Benson closing their eyes one after another, clasping their hands, and silently praying in their hearts. He withdrew his gaze, and like Melissa and Benson, he raised his hands, devoutly praying in his heart. O Evernight Goddess, more exalted than the cosmos, more ancient than eternity. You are the Lord of Crimson, the Mother of Concealment, and the Empress of Misfortune and Fear, the Lord of Slumber and Silence. I confess that I have concealed things from my family, the most important people in my world. I have hidden very important matters. I do not ask for their forgiveness, nor for their understanding. If they resent me, I will accept it. If they drive me away, I will leave. I only hope that they can live healthy and fulfilling lives. Praise the goddess. Klein suppressed the emotions in his heart, repeating his plea again and again. He knew that deities existed, and as the leader of a secret organization, he wished for the first time that the gaze of a deity would fall upon him. He didn't know how much time had passed when Klein heard a slight movement beside him. Melissa and Benson had finished their prayers. He immediately followed suit and opened his eyes. Klein looked at Melissa and Benson, a prolonged feeling of vexation in his chest, as if a giant stone was pressing on his heart, not painful but very uncomfortable. The clown's ability allowed him to perfectly conceal his emotions. He smiled and nodded at Benson and Melissa as usual, leaving St. Selena Cathedral with his brother and sister and returning home. Chapter 151, The Earl Returns. Klein's special promotion application was quickly approved, and this time it was verified by Mr. Sesama. "I'm very surprised," Sesama said, carrying a silver-white briefcase, with a clear smile in his tone. "You truly are a genius." This senior deacon was genuinely happy that the Church of the Night could have such a genius. Klein noticed the briefcase Sesama was carrying. This time there was no need to swear on a holy relic, but Mr. Sesama still kept the holy relic with him. "I heard you're applying to become a Red Gloves. This is indeed a good choice, you can develop better there." However, Sesama suddenly changed his tone and said seriously, "Red Gloves are an elite Nighthawks squad. The dangers they face are far greater than those of ordinary Nighthawks squads. Although your promotion speed is fast, you have too little experience." Sesama bent down halfway, placed the briefcase at his feet, and earnestly advised, "For Red Gloves, the most important thing is not sequence. Without enough experience, you can easily make error moves when facing those dangerous Beyonder events, putting yourself and your teammates in perilous situations. I suggest you stay in a Nighthawks squad for a year or two, accumulate enough experience, and then apply to become a Red Gloves." "Thank you very much for your advice," Klein said with a smile, not directly answering whether he accepted Sesama's suggestion. Klein was well aware of the situations he would face after becoming a Red Gloves, so after learning Ancient Hermes, Giant Language, Ancient Elvish, and Draconic, he specifically changed Eve's nightly lessons to listening to various Beyonder events, gaining a lot of experience and lessons. Moreover, after multiple sea hunts for pirates, Klein had also accumulated considerable combat experience. In addition, Klein's extensive Beyonder knowledge could, to some extent, compensate for his lack of practical experience. Sesama also did not continue to persuade, silently sighing in his heart. Genius is always different from others. He only hoped that Klein would not be blinded by his own talent. Sesama genuinely admired this young Nighthawks. "Let's begin. Like last time, the first step is to test your mastery of the potion." As he spoke, Klein once again felt the same sensation as last time, drowsy yet highly alert. "Very good." As Sesama's magnetic voice faded, Klein regained his vigor. "The mastery of the potion is still above excellent," Sesama said. "Next is to check if there are any hidden dangers in your body and mind. I believe you can easily pass this test." Klein nodded, immediately began to adjust his state, and prepared to meet the test 3 minutes later. He secretly took several deep breaths, using meditation to block out negative distracting thoughts. Sesama took out a silver pocket watch, snapped it open, and the faint ticking sound entered Klein's ears. 3 minutes later, with another crisp sound, Sesama closed the pocket watch. The test began. A melodious tune drifted from Sesama's mouth, echoing in the room, gradually losing its harmony and becoming a maddening noise. An uncontrollable irritation suddenly appeared in Klein's heart, as if a huge stone was pressing on his chest, making him breathless. Klein felt as if his entire heart had fallen into black mud, sticky, dull, and disgusting, sinking deeper and deeper, and when it was submerged by the black mud, it was then stepped on twice by annoying people. So irritating. He felt like beating Mr. Sesama up. Klein looked up at Sesama, with a thoughtful look in his eyes. But before Klein could finish his thoughts, the feeling of irritation suddenly vanished. "You passed, but your performance was not as good as last time," Sesama commented. After the feeling of irritation disappeared, Klein's rationality returned, and he was surprised to find that he had actually been planning how to secretly beat up Mr. Sesama at that time. Too bad. Without Sesama's reminder, Klein could also see that his state was not as good as last time. After all, Last time after adapting, Klein felt nothing, and the irritation was all feigned by him. It's probably because of what's coming next. Klein sighed in his heart, thinking. Fortunately, it's not serious. The test was over, and Sesama handed Klein the potion formula and ingredients, giving him a few instructions before leaving. Next is the application for red gloves. Klein thought silently in his heart. The promotion did not bring him joy, nor did the increase in weekly salary. The time for the Earl Returns performance soon arrived, and Klein returned home an hour before the show. Opening the door, Klein saw Melissa sitting on the sofa, carefully examining the 3 tickets in her hand. Even though she had been studying them for days, she still liked to hold the tickets and examine them, as if she could see something different each time. Benson was reading the newspaper, but his eyes occasionally glanced at Melissa beside him, with an unconcealed smile in his eyes. Seeing such a scene, Klein suddenly felt a sourness in his eyes, but in that instant, he subconsciously used the ability of Clown to conceal his abnormality. As if nothing had happened. Suddenly, Klein intensely disliked the ability of Clown. He couldn't explain why, but at this moment, he hated such an ability. Klein. Benson immediately noticed Klein outside the door, smiled, put down the newspaper, and said, "Let's go now." Melissa looked up, clutching the tickets tightly. "Okay, let's go." As she spoke, she subconsciously tugged at her skirt. The Moretti siblings had all put on their going-out clothes, looking forward to the play. Since their parents passed away, they had rarely had such happy times. This was indeed a popular play, and there were many spectators present. In this era, those who could watch plays were people of a certain means, and all the gentlemen and ladies were dressed respectably. Melissa unconsciously straightened her back and moved a few steps towards her brothers. "Don't be nervous, Melissa," Klein said with a reassuring smile. "I'm not nervous," Melissa shook her head, a hint of confusion in her tone, and said, "We're just watching a play, there's no need to be nervous." Klein and Benson smiled, not exposing Melissa's unconscious slight nervousness. They followed the crowd and soon entered the venue, finding their seats. As the gentlemen and ladies took their seats, the red curtain slowly opened. Character after character appeared and exited, enacting the play. Melissa and Benson gradually became engrossed in the wonderful play, their attention fully on the stage. They watched the play, and Klein watched them. Finally, the play ended, and the curtain fell. Just as people in the previous life discussed the plot after watching a movie, people in this world also discussed the plot after watching a play. All the way home, Melissa and Benson discussed The Earl Returns, from the plot and characters to the set design. Klein's attention was not on the play at the time, but he still glanced at it twice and had also read the original novel, so he could participate in the Moretti siblings' discussion. The 3 siblings chatted and laughed all the way home. Chapter 152 I Am Not Klein. Klein quickly and smoothly passed the Red Gloves assessment. Like Leonard, he invited all the Nighthawks to dinner at the Silver Crown restaurant. When he returned home, Melissa and Benson were still awake. Klein chatted with Benson and Melissa for a while longer, then they all said goodnight around 11 and returned to their rooms. Upon returning to his room, Klein immediately locked the door. He took out the ritual silver dagger from the drawer, infused it with spirituality, which immediately bloomed from the dagger. With a wave of the dagger, an invisible wall of spirituality quietly appeared. Klein took a deep breath and began to prepare the bestowal ritual. Since he was bestowing upon himself, he didn't need as many complex materials to please the gods. The fool who does not belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Your loyal servant implores your gaze. Implores you to open the door to your kingdom. Implores you to bestow power. The moment the illusory door took shape, Klein took 4 steps backward, silently chanting in his heart. Immortal venerable who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Heavenly Lord who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. God who blesses the profound and mysterious heavens. Celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. A familiar babbling sound entered Klein's ears, then vanished. When he opened his eyes again, he was already sitting in the high-backed armchair at the head of the long table. Klein stood up and took out all the gold pounds he had hidden behind the high-backed armchair. These gold pounds were neatly arranged. Without time to count them, Klein placed the gold pounds into the door of bestowal, then simulated the feeling of falling, and left Saphira Castle. Green banknotes lay on the altar. Some were scattered during the bestowal process, but they were still mostly neat. Klein dispelled the wall of spirituality, moved the banknotes from the altar to his desk, and then hid the altar again. After restoring everything, Klein took out the money from his pocket and began to count his total savings. A total of £2,528, 6 soer, 5 pence. Phew. Klein let out a deep breath. He never thought he would one day become a small wealthy man. Benson would go to Backlund to take an exam in 3 months. Before the results came out, he didn't know if they would settle in Backlund or return to Tingen. Klein had never divined this question. When it came to issues that might involve Melissa and Benson's attitudes towards him, he always refused to divine. Klein lowered his eyes, suppressing the emotions in his heart, and calculated silently. Bella's weekly salary is 5 soer, which is about £4 10 soer over 4 months. Klein thought as he pulled out 4 £1 notes and 1 10 soer note and set them aside. The rent for Narcissus Street No. 2 is 12 soer per week, and the furniture usage fee is 3 pence. For 4 months, the rent would be £10 16 soer, and the furniture usage fee would be 4 soer 6 pence, totaling £11 6 pence. There should be a discount for renting for 4 months at once, so he'd remove the 6 pence first. Klein took out a £10 note and a £1 note from the pile of banknotes and set them aside as well. Old Sister's apartment rent in Backlund should be higher than Narcissus Street, but the weekly rent wouldn't exceed £1. Plus daily expenses, 10 soer would be enough. Thinking this, Klein pulled out another £1 note and a 10 soer note and set them aside. There were also Melissa and Benson's daily expenses. He hoped Melissa and Benson wouldn't touch this money. Klein thought to himself, feeling lonely. If they maintained their current standard of living, food expenses would be about £1 per week, which is £18. Adding in occasional small luxuries, he'd round it up to £25. A total of £42. He now had £2,486, 6 soer, 5 pence remaining. Klein carefully counted the remaining gold pounds twice, categorized them, and placed them into envelopes. He squeezed the bulging envelopes and tucked them into the drawer. Looking up, Klein saw the metal figurine on his desk, a hint of loneliness in his eyes. He reached out, wanting to touch the figurine, but stopped a few centimeters away. His fingers twitched, his eyes filled with indecision. Finally, he picked up the metal figurine. The next day. Today Melissa had school, and Benson had work, so Klein booked an afternoon train ticket. In the early morning, he woke up early, quickly ate breakfast, and went to the Tingen Housing Association to submit 4 months' rent. As Klein expected, paying 4 months' rent at once did come with a discount. In the end, Klein only paid £10 12 soer. After settling the rent, Klein returned home to find Bella. As soon as Klein returned home, he saw the maid, Bella, sweeping in the living room. Mr. Klein. Bella's tone held a hint of confusion. She put down the broom and walked towards Klein. Is there something you need? Klein nodded, took out the gold pounds he had already put into an envelope, and handed them to Bella. I need to leave Tingen, and I'm not sure when I'll be back, so I'd like to pay you your wages for the next 4 months in advance, Klein explained. This envelope contains not only your wages but also the food expenses for the next 4 months. We've discussed it, and it totals £25. Bella was clearly startled by Klein's actions. Her eyes widened, and she dared not accept it, feeling helpless and at a loss. Only after hearing Klein's explanation did she sigh in relief and take the envelope. Before I leave, I hope to enjoy our last exclusive time together with Benson and Melissa. Miss Bella, you can take a day off and return tomorrow or tonight. Klein continued. Bella looked at Klein with some confusion. She could stay in her own room without disturbing the Moretti siblings' private time, as she had done before, there was no need to give her a direct holiday. But Bella didn't think much of it and happily accepted the unexpected holiday. "All right, Mr. Klein." After Bella left, Klein went upstairs to his room, sent all the Beander-related items hidden in the room to Saphira Castle, and eliminated all Beander traces he might have left behind. After doing all this, he restored the room to its original appearance. Klein took out the envelopes from the drawer, went into Benson's room, and placed them all under Benson's quilt. He patted the quilt, tidying it up, as if he had never been there. Klein didn't look around much. He lowered his head, left Benson's room, and sat on the sofa, his eyes vacant, waiting for Melissa and Benson to return. He didn't know how long he waited. During this time, he wanted to check the clock countless times, and countless times he restrained himself. He simultaneously hoped Melissa and Benson would return soon, and hoped they wouldn't return. But no matter what Klein thought in his heart, reality would not change because of his thoughts. He heard the sound of the door opening. Judgment time had arrived. Klein. As soon as Melissa entered, she saw Klein sitting blankly on the sofa, looking very dejected. Although Klein was as presentable as ever, Melissa still felt a strange sense of dejection about him. Benson also frowned. As an older brother, he understood his younger siblings very well and also noticed Klein's abnormality. Because of Klein's trained schedule, Benson had specifically applied to leave work early and immediately left after Melissa's school day ended. "Klein, what's wrong?" "Melissa." Klein subconsciously touched his pocket, then immediately moved his hand away as if burned, turning to look at his younger sister Melissa and older brother Benson. "Benson." Benson felt inexplicably uneasy, perhaps because Klein's abnormality was too obvious. "I have something to tell you too." Klein lowered his head, not daring to look at Melissa and Benson. Although they didn't know what had happened, Melissa and Benson clearly sensed the seriousness of the matter and immediately became anxious, not even realizing Bella was absent. "Klein, what happened? Tell us," Melissa said immediately, her eyes filled with worry. "We will definitely help you." Benson's face was serious. He didn't speak, but he nodded firmly after Melissa finished speaking. Klein opened his mouth, choked up, and said, "I am not Klein." Melissa and Benson's minds went blank, as if Klein were speaking to them in an incomprehensible language. At this moment, he did not use his clown abilities. He finally didn't have to use his clown abilities. "I am not Klein." Klein repeated again. His eyes were very sore, and the sorrow and guilt in his heart felt like they were drowning him, like a tide making him unable to breathe. But in this suffocation, he actually felt a sense of relief. Relief. "I am not Klein," he murmured again, and tears finally broke through the confines of his eyes, streaming down his cheeks. Klein felt a slight itch on his face. He didn't know why, nor did he want to think about why. He looked up at Melissa and Benson. Chapter 153, Farewell. "Klein, what are you talking about?" Benson, his eyes filled with anxiety, immediately stepped forward and grasped Klein's shoulders. "Let's go to the church or the hospital, first to the church." "No, I'm very clear-headed, Benson, I'm extremely clear-headed." Klein looked up at Benson, his eyes full of determination. "I know clearly every word I'm saying. How could we possibly believe such an absurd thing?" Benson said immediately, his hands on Klein's shoulders trembling unconsciously. Klein closed his eyes. He felt Benson's trembling and said bitterly, "But the truth is just that absurd." "Klein, can you come to the church with us?" Benson said, trembling, with a hint of almost imperceptible pleading in his voice. "You've been influenced by an evil entity, your mind is broken, you have no idea what you're saying." Melissa stared blankly at Klein, her eyes full of surprise and doubt. Her gaze repeatedly scrutinized the man in front of her, shrinking back several times, as if she wanted to see through everything but was also afraid of seeing through the truth. All of Klein's minor differences from days past now surfaced before Melissa's eyes, playing out like a drama, but now she was a character in the play. "No, impossible, impossible. If you're not Klein." Melissa's eyes reddened, and she said with great emphasis, "Then who are you?" The real. Melissa couldn't continue. She knew that if the Klein in front of her wasn't the real Klein, if this Klein who had lived with them for so long wasn't the real Klein, then the real Klein might never return. That was a result she couldn't accept. My name is. Klein's eyes fixed on Melissa and Benson. He took a step back, and as Klein retreated, Benson's hands, which had been holding his shoulders, slowly fell. Benson's eyes were fixed on him, watching the retreating Klein. If he took one step forward, or exerted force with his hands, he could stop Klein from retreating. His hand brushed Klein's sleeve and fell to his side, and Klein stood just a step away from him. My name is Zhou Mingrui, Klein said, lowering his gaze, revealing his true name to someone in this world for the first time. Zhou Mingrui. Melissa pronounced his name syllable by syllable, but still didn't get the correct pronunciation. Zhou Mingrui, Klein repeated, but had no intention of correcting Melissa's pronunciation. Now was not the time to consider such issues. To you, this is a very strange name, isn't it? Because I come from a world completely different from yours, and there, my name is not strange. You were. No, you came to our house before you found a job. Melissa's eyes widened suddenly, her voice trembling slightly. Klein, during that burglary. Benson immediately turned, looking at Melissa in shock, his mind momentarily blank. Melissa, what are you saying? You actually believe such an absurd thing? Benson asked urgently. But, Benson, Melissa choked out, we noticed it long ago, didn't we? You and I, we should have known, but we just never thought about it. Benson instinctively took a step back, immediately wanting to refute, no. He opened his mouth, but his voice broke after the first word. No. Benson wanted to refute. Scene after scene of their past together flashed before his eyes. The more he recalled, the more he confirmed, the more he was unable to refute. Benson, Klein, Melissa said, trembling, we cannot abandon Klein because we cannot accept Klein's death. Benson froze. He lowered his eyes, then slowly closed his mouth. Klein looked up at Melissa and Benson, then lowered his head again, his fingers at his side moving unconsciously. Klein was also a victim of that burglary. After he died, I became Klein, he softly completed Melissa's unfinished sentence. So, you entered his body after Klein died. Benson took a lot of time, trying to sort out the cause and effect of the matter. He now only hoped this was just a nightmare. After hearing Klein's words, he felt a cannonball explode in his mind. Klein nodded silently, acknowledging Benson's words. Bastard. You are desecrating Klein's corpse. An uncontrollable surge of anger rose in Benson and Melissa's hearts. He immediately raised his cane to strike Klein. Melissa was startled, not expecting Benson to directly resort to violence. She immediately rushed forward, wanting to protect Klein. Klein saw the cane coming towards him, closed his eyes, and stood still, neither dodging nor avoiding. The cane hovered above Klein's head, not falling for a long time. Klein, who didn't feel the heavy blow, opened his eyes and saw the cane suspended in midair. Melissa's raised hands, which were meant to stop Benson, were now frozen in midair by the sudden reversal. Benson held the cane, his eyes red with anger, his hand gripping the cane trembling, yet he still didn't bring down the attack. He stared intently at the man in front of him, gritting his teeth as he swung the cane down. Bang! Klein lowered his head, staring blankly at the cane that had smashed at his feet. Why did you do this? Why did you do this? Benson withdrew his hand, striking the ground heavily with the cane. I didn't want to either, I never thought it would be like this, Klein said, looking down and muttering, I'm just an ordinary person, but for a period, I was very, very unlucky. And it just so happened that I had previously bought something that was said to have the function of changing luck, so I took it out to try. But after trying, nothing happened. I ate, washed, and slept as usual, but when I woke up, I found myself in a strange world, having become Klein, and that thing didn't come to this world with me. Benson was speechless. He had thought that an evil spirit-like entity occupied Klein's body, but he never expected it to be an innocent ordinary person. Melissa pressed her lips together, various emotions mixed together like a overturned spice rack. I also have my own parents, and although I don't have a younger sister, I have an older brother. Klein continued to narrate. He looked up, walked directly past Melissa and Benson, and arrived at the door of the room. Neither Melissa nor Benson asked him what he was going to do, nor did they stop him. Both pairs of eyes watched Klein at the door, watching him open the wooden door. An exceptionally beautiful lady stood outside the door. Teacher Eve. Melissa gasped, covering her mouth, momentarily unsure how much Teacher Eve had heard, and how she should conceal this matter. Benson's eyes also widened, his face full of surprise. He had met Melissa's teacher before and recognized this lady. This is my older brother. Klein turned around and introduced them. For the same reason, he also came to this world and became an older sister. Melissa and Benson were too astonished to speak. A man turning into a woman, how unbelievable. So, Teacher Eve is for. Melissa stammered, pointing at Klein. Yes. Eve nodded. Although Melissa didn't finish her sentence, everyone present could understand her meaning. Benson sat down shakily on the sofa, one hand on his forehead, trying to process everything that had happened today. After a long while, Benson asked, "You come from another world, so do you want to return to your original world?" The eldest brother of the Moretti family always appeared very reliable in front of his younger siblings, but now he looked so dejected. Klein was silent for 2 seconds, then slowly said, "Yes. Although my brother also came to this world, I still have my parents, friends, many, many things. Things I like, things I dislike, familiar things, unfamiliar things, all are reasons for me to go back." "Then do you have?" Benson lowered his head, opened his mouth, the stinging sensation in his eyes impossible to ignore. He wanted to ask, but after opening his mouth, he found he couldn't ask. "You two should go." All questions turned into these final words. Melissa turned her head away from Klein, her eyes downcast, saying nothing. Klein took a deep look at Melissa and Benson. "I'm sorry." Benson and Melissa closed their eyes, forcing themselves not to look. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of footsteps grew fainter and fainter until it disappeared. Only then did they open their eyes, their reddened eyes revealing everything about them. The brother and sister remained silent, stunned in place, as if they hadn't yet woken up from this absurd reality. Melissa, her eyes vacant, took a step, walking mechanically, step by step, to the window. She saw Klein and Eve, walking side by side on the road. Those were his family. A tear rolled down the girl's cheek. She finally couldn't hold back, crying silently. They had lost Klein, and they had lost Zhou Mingrui. Benson slowly stood up, walking slowly to the window, standing beside his sister. He reached out and gently wiped Melissa's tears with a handkerchief. Melissa pushed Benson's hand away, still standing at the window, watching her departing family. Benson's body stiffened. He withdrew the handkerchief and stood silently in place, watching his departing family. Klein could feel Benson and Melissa's gaze. He forced himself not to look back, moving further and further away under Melissa and Benson's gaze. He didn't take a carriage, he just wanted to prolong the gaze from his family. Chapter 154, Klein's Room. The shriek of the whistle suddenly rang out, and the steel dragon snaked across the land. Klein and Eve sat opposite each other on the seats, silence permeating between them. "Where's Rui?" Klein asked, feeling it necessary to say something to alleviate the current silence. "Cats can't ride trains. She was already in Backland before we got on the train," Eve replied. "Actually, you could have gone back earlier too. That way, you'd save on the train ticket," Klein said casually. His mind was a bit muddled right now, so he just said whatever came to mind. Eve pressed her lips down and said, "The first time we met, I also sat across from you like this, watching you." Klein was stunned for a moment, then lowered his head and whispered, "I'm sorry. This isn't your error." Eve gazed at Klein, her soft dark hair falling over her chest, swaying slightly with her movements. She was in a very good mood right now. Although she didn't care if Zhou Mingrui was by her side, it didn't stop her from being happy about her brother's return. Of course, Eve knew these emotions couldn't be shown in front of Zhou Mingrui, even if they both knew it. Klein looked up at Eve, gazing into her eyes. He had always known Eve had a pair of beautiful and affectionate eyes, as deep as the deep sea, with a hint of allure added by her deep peach blossom eyes. The gentle smile that always graced those eyes had now disappeared. Klein's reflection was mirrored in her pupils. Klein looked at her, at himself in her eyes, at the Klein in her pupils. Slowly, he shifted his gaze. Regarding this matter, whether I'm right or wrong, it's a fact that I'm sorry to you, Benson, and Melissa. Klein slowly turned his head. He didn't want to talk anymore, resting his forehead against the train window, looking out at Tingen City, which was getting further and further away. Tingen's night had no dazzling lights, only streetlights and a few rooms emitting faint glows. A crimson veil covered the silent city, gently caressing every sleeping life. Klein, using the moonlight, barely gazed at Tingen. In his sight, Tingen City grew smaller and smaller, until finally, it completely disappeared into the darkness, no longer visible. Even though he couldn't see it, he still leaned against the window, looking towards Tingen City. Klein's forehead rested on the glass, and his right hand unconsciously reached into his jacket pocket, caressing the metal puppet. He had taken this from the Moretti family home. He had taken a metal puppet, a Klein, from the Moretti home. Eve looked out the window towards Tingen, but only for a glance before retracting her gaze and turning to look at Klein, who was leaning against the window. The steel dragon snaked forward on the land, howling as it ripped through the air, advancing into the night. The whistle sounded again, and the train slowly pulled into the station. They had arrived in Backland, the city of hope. Klein withdrew his gaze from the window, pulled his hand from his pocket, and stood up, bracing himself on the seat. Eve stood up immediately after Klein, and they both got off the train one after another. In the dead of night, no public carriages could be found. Eve took Klein directly back to her residence in Backland. Meow. The moment the two figures appeared inside the house, Rui opened her eyes and let out a soft meow from her perch on the sofa. Good evening, Rui, Klein responded. I've prepared a room for you, Eve said, lowering her hand from Klein's shoulder and holding Rui in her arms. It's on the second floor. After speaking, Eve took 2 steps forward, turned, and waved at Klein, signaling him to follow. Only when she saw Klein following did she turn and go upstairs. Eve walked towards the room on the left, and with a push, the door swung open, revealing the room's appearance. This is your room, Eve said to Klein, pointing at the room. Klein took 2 steps forward and looked inside the room. A bed, about 2 meters long, occupied a good portion of the room. A gray pillow lay quietly at the head of the bed. The quilt was not folded but spread flat on the bed. From the style, the pillowcase, sheets, and duvet cover seemed to be a set. On either side of the bed, there was a black wooden cabinet, both empty. To the right of the right cabinet, there was also a large wooden wardrobe. In front of the bed, to the side front of the window, there was an empty desk. Eve walked into the room and pulled open the wardrobe, revealing the clothes she had prepared for Klein inside. Klein followed Eve into the room immediately and was surprised to find that Eve had even prepared clothes for him. There weren't many clothes in the wardrobe, 2 sets of pajamas, 2 formal suits, and 1 trench coat. I thought I'd be sleeping on the sofa tonight. I didn't expect you to not only prepare a room but even clothes, Klein said with a light chuckle, his surprise fading from his face, though a hint of guilt appeared in his eyes. Eve closed the wardrobe door, not responding to Klein's words, but instead said, let's buy a cane tomorrow. Klein hadn't taken his cane when he left the Moretti home. All right, Klein nodded, then remembering he had no money, immediately added, but I'll need to go hunt pirates at sea first. Eve nodded, indicating understanding. Also, Klein took out the £1 he had brought, handed it to Eve, and said, this week's rent. Now that we're living together, I can't let you bear the rent alone. I signed a long-term contract and paid a year's rent at once, Eve said, taking the £1 Klein offered. Then give it back to me, Klein said, extending his hand. No, Eve said, holding the £1 banknote between two fingers and waving it twice in front of Klein. Now it's shared family property. Klein chuckled and withdrew his hand. He hadn't actually intended to take it back. Eve smiled and tucked the £1 banknote back into Klein's pocket. Klein was stunned, looked at his pocket, and a hint of a smile colored his eyes. He didn't say anything, as it was, after all, shared family property. Eve withdrew her hand and instead pinched Klein's sleeve, half dragging him out of the room. Klein obediently allowed her to drag him. "This is my room," Eve said, pointing to the room on the right outside Klein's room. "You can come to me for anything, but not in the morning, of course." Eve liked to sleep in, Klein knew this. It had been the same in his previous life, she would always sleep until noon on weekends. "That's the washroom, and there's another washroom on the right side as well." Eve took 2 steps forward, past Klein, and opened the washroom on the left. "You'll use this washroom from now on. I've prepared your toiletries." Klein looked over, the layout was very similar to Narcissus Street. "There's also a storage room downstairs, but I haven't stored anything in it. If you need it, you can use it freely," Eve said, pointing downwards. Klein thought about it. He didn't seem to have anything that needed storing, as he already had Saphira Castle, a convenient and secure portable storage space. "You should rest first. You still have special training at the church tomorrow." Klein and Eve bid each other goodnight and returned to their respective rooms. He opened the wardrobe door, took out a black set of pajamas, and after a simple wash, lay down on the bed. Klein touched the soft bedding beneath him, feeling a moment of disorientation. He turned over, staring blankly at the ceiling. He wondered how Benson, Melissa, and Eve were doing now. Chapter 155, Message. Crimson moonlight streamed like water through the silent city, and the warm glow of gas lamps illuminated the mist. Melissa and Benson sat facing each other on the sofa, silently staring at the floor. After a long while, Benson finally broke the suffocating silence. "Go get some rest. You have school tomorrow, and I have work." Melissa's eyes regained some of their sparkle. She stiffly raised her head and said dazedly, "Okay." The girl slowly rose, supporting herself on the sofa, and walked step by step towards her bedroom. Klein's room suddenly appeared in her line of sight, and Melissa paused. The girl raised her hand and slowly stroked the wooden door. Her fair hand slid down the door and rested gently on the doorknob. She suddenly gripped the doorknob tightly, her hand trembling slightly. After a long moment, Melissa closed her eyes in pain and released her hand. She ultimately did not open that room. Benson followed behind Melissa, watching her. He stared at the door with a complex expression, and after several hesitations, he also did not push it open. Benson shifted his gaze, no longer looking at Klein's room, and instead looked at Melissa. He watched his sister enter her bedroom before walking back to his own bedroom, step by mechanical step. The room was dim. Benson did not turn on the gas lamp. He walked slowly to the bed, pulled back the covers, and prepared to rest. Bang! A sudden sound abruptly rang out in the room. Benson saw something fall from the covers and immediately lowered his head to look at the floor. By the moonlight, he could barely make out what it was. It was a bulging envelope. Benson immediately picked up the envelope and examined it in his hands. Did he leave it? Thinking this, Benson immediately opened the envelope and pulled out its contents. It was gold pounds. Benson paused, then pulled out all the banknotes. As he flipped through them, he finally discovered something different among the notes, a blank piece of paper with writing on it. He immediately pulled out the white paper, quickly walked to the gas lamp, and turned on the light. Click, click. Warm light illuminated the room. Benson used the light to look at the note in his hand and clearly saw the words on it, Zhou Mingrui. Benson stared blankly at the words on the note. It was a script he had never seen before, but his intuition told him that these were words from that world, and Zhou Mingrui, on the note was his name. Benson placed the envelope, banknotes, and note on the table, then turned and walked towards the bed. He lifted the covers and, sure enough, found several more envelopes inside. Almost impatiently, He picked up the envelopes, opened them one by one, and found notes with messages inside. The remaining notes were all written in Lowness, and Benson carefully read his messages under the light. Perhaps this is presumptuous to say to you, but I still want to tell you that in my heart, Melissa and Benson will always be my family. This money was obtained through legal means. You can use it with peace of mind. The system for admitting government employees through examinations will soon be implemented. You must prepare well. I've prepared some mechanical parts for Melissa. Melissa, you, quote. Each word of concern, each instruction, made Benson's emotions exceptionally complex. Klein's death had nothing to do with him, and occupying Klein's body was not his wish, but Benson did not know how to face this sudden family member who had taken over his younger brother's body. He could only continue flipping through the notes, trying not to think about anything. 18 Minsk Street, Sherwood Borough, Backland. Benson stared blankly at the address, not reacting for a moment. This is his address in Backland. Why give us the address? Does he hope we can write to him? Benson gazed at the note in front of him. After a long while, he put the note down. He put all the banknotes and notes back into the envelope, placed the envelope in the drawer, and closed the drawer. Benson covered his forehead, his expression complex, and stared down at the desk, his eyes revealing pain and sorrow. He was going back. No contact, for his and their good. He only hoped that when he returned, he would give Klein's body back. 18 Minsk Street, Sherwood Borough, Backland. Because he had to go to the church for training, Klein woke up much earlier than usual. He rubbed his eyes, feeling his head heavy. Klein hadn't slept well last night. He lay in bed for a long time before finally managing to fall asleep, but once asleep, he kept having dreams, many of them nightmares, making him wonder if a nightmare had come to his dreams for a team-building exercise. Klein yawned, casually ran his fingers through his messy hair, and with half-closed eyes, got up and dressed. After getting dressed, Klein felt a bit more awake. He rubbed his face, opened his eyes, and stared blankly at the unfamiliar room before realizing that he had already left Tingen. Klein shook his head, tidied his clothes, which were a bit disheveled from dressing with half-closed eyes, then opened the door and left the room. The house was quiet. Klein glanced at the tightly closed door next to him, knowing that Eve was probably still asleep, and tiptoed down the stairs. Klein went to the kitchen and opened the cupboard. There were no ingredients in the cupboard, but there was a white loaf of bread, 2 rye loaves, a bag of cat food, and a bag of pet biscuits. The rye bread was not the cheap, hard kind Klein used to eat, but soft, round rolls, slightly more expensive than white bread. However, the most expensive item was the bag of pet biscuits. Humans are worse off than cats, Klein muttered to himself as he took a white loaf of bread. He placed the white bread on the table, then opened the lower cupboard, seeing several glass bottles of milk and goat's milk, as well as some small snacks inside. Klein walked out of the kitchen with a bottle of milk and a loaf of bread. This would be his breakfast today. After a hurried breakfast, Klein stood up and instinctively reached for his cane, but grasped empty air. Klein paused, silently withdrew his hand, pulled down his top hat, and quickly walked to the front door. He opened the door and looked out at the world. Although Sherwood Borough was considered one of the better areas in Backland, there were still no white clouds or blue skies. The air was filled with mist, obstructing people's vision. Klein stepped down the stairs and quickly walked to the mailbox in the courtyard, glancing inside. Nothing. It's only been one night, the letter couldn't have arrived yet, Klein silently comforted himself, but he also knew that it wasn't that the letter hadn't arrived, but that there was no letter at all. Melissa and Benson hadn't written to him. There will be, Klein lowered his eyes, thinking to himself, someday, there will be, right. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Chapter 156 Confirmation. Klein took a public carriage to St. Samuel Cathedral. This was his second time visiting St. Samuel Cathedral. As he got off, Klein subconsciously reached for his cane, only realizing it was gone after his hand met empty air. I need to buy a new one as soon as possible. Klein got off the carriage, thinking to himself, I'm really not used to this. Klein walked into the cathedral empty-handed, and the first thing he saw was an unexpected figure, Mei Gao Oc. Ah! Mei Gao Oc also noticed Klein immediately, covering her mouth in surprise. Good morning, Miss Mei Gao Oc. Klein took off his top hat and greeted Mei Gao Oc. What a surprise, are you doing well? I am doing very well, thank you for your concern, Mr. Klein, Mei Gao Oc replied politely. I have passed the inspection by the Holy See and am now undergoing examination at St. Samuel Cathedral. If there are no abnormalities after half a month, I can return to Tingen. That's truly good news. Klein was genuinely happy for Mei Gao Oc. In such situations, death was usually the most likely outcome. Is Miss Mei Gao Oc planning to work in Tingen? Klein asked tactfully. A special Beander like Mei Gao Oc, who had directly become a mid-sequence and had gestated a spawn of evil god, could not possibly be released if she didn't become a Nighthawk. Thinking of this, Klein remembered the skeleton in the coffin, Mr. Azek's child. As the Beander characteristic within Mei Gao Oc came from Mr. Azek's child, Klein's mood became somewhat complex, but he did not show it. Yes, all my family are in Tingen, and the Holy See happens to want to strengthen the Nighthawks in Tingen, and I haven't seen my family for a long time. Mei Gao Oc paused, pursed her lips, and said with extreme displeasure, it's all because of that damned fellow. Klein nodded in agreement. Liner Wuxi's actions could be described as quite insane. Mei Gao Oc took several deep breaths before calming down. Although several months had passed, she could not let it go. She couldn't bear to recall that period when she was like a madwoman. No, she was mad, actually treating a monster as her own child. Whenever she thought back, she felt as if she was reliving that time, with the monster talking to her from inside her womb, frantically absorbing her vitality, clearly feeling death approaching step by step, yet she felt joy as if blessed by a god. That fellow is still in the Holy See. I hope his future days are spent in pain and despair, Mei Gao Oc said indignantly. When we were going to the Holy See, those abominable members of the Aurora Order even tried to rescue him. It's truly damnable. Oh, and Baron Edgar, Mei Gao Oc continued, he actually sold Beander materials to that fellow. If he weren't a benevolent and unwitting gentleman, I would surely curse him as harshly as I curse the Aurora Order and that fellow. However, it was also because of this act that the Nighthawks caught him, which he deserved. Mei Gao Oc calmed herself, feeling happy at Liner Wuxi's current predicament. Speaking of which, Baron Edgar is actually a Beander. I was truly stunned when I first found out. I was also very surprised when I first learned about it. Many nobles know about Beander, and quite a few nobles are Beanders themselves, Klein echoed. Empress Burrow, Backland. Audrey sat gracefully on the sofa, an old but well-preserved open notebook resting on her lap. The young lady looked down, occasionally turning a page, seemingly searching for something. After the Keelangos incident, Audrey had subtly revealed some information about the full moon curse to Furs. As she expected, although Miss Furs tried her best to act nonchalant, a spectator is very difficult to deceive. After that, Audrey never actively brought up the full moon, muttering, waiting for her to come to her proactively. And today, Furs finally proactively brought up the full moon, muttering to Audrey, using novel inspiration as an excuse to learn more details. Found it. Audrey subtly curved her lips, deliberately slowing her movements, and looked up as Furs's eyes became increasingly difficult to conceal her nervousness. I'm sorry, it's been too long, Miss Furs, for making you wait, Audrey said, picking up the notebook and handing it to Furs. It's right here. It's all right, it was I who troubled Miss Audrey. Furs immediately shook her head, concealing the eagerness in her eyes, and primly took the notebook. The ancient Abraham family's bloodline curse. During the full moon, incomprehensible mutterings are heard, causing widespread death and madness among members of the Abraham family. Death and madness. Furs's hand trembled, almost dropping the notebook. Although she had long foreseen her future, with a high probability of either dying or losing control under the full moon, muttering, seeing such an outcome presented before her still made her heart palpitate uncontrollably. Audrey noticed Firz's hand holding the book waver for a moment, glanced at the notebook, and wondered if she had scared Miss Firz. No, it should be she and Miss Empress, who had scared Firz. After all, the content in the notebook was her secondary processing based on the information provided by Miss Empress, with some fabricated elements added. Firz secretly swallowed her saliva, forcing herself to perk up and continue reading, as this was the first time in so many years she had seen hope. Non-Abraham family members may be affected by the full moon muttering curse for certain reasons, but behind all reasons, there must be a member of the Abraham family. Abraham family. Firz silently recited the name in her heart, her thumb unconsciously stroking the page back and forth. I am not a member of the Abraham family, that's for sure, so I must have been influenced by a member of the Abraham family. Mrs. Annalisa. Mrs. Annalisa was a member of the Abraham family. Firz would never forget that it was this old lady who introduced her to the Beyonder world, and it was only after using the bracelet left behind by Mrs. Annalisa that she began to be cursed by the full moon muttering. But, Firz tightened her grip on the notebook. She had no information about Mrs. Annalisa's relatives at all. She calmed her emotions and looked down naturally. Firz did not ponder for long. She was very careful to spend a similar amount of time on each passage of text. There wasn't much about the full moon muttering in the notebook, less than a page, and soon Firz saw the last sentence. Seeking the blessing of a deity might resist the full moon muttering. The blessing of a deity, Firz repeated in her heart, feeling utterly disheartened. She knew very well the meaning of deity's blessing. It was something only a favored one could possess. How could she obtain it? This was the only solution recorded in the notebook. No, Miss Audrey only heard rumors, perhaps there are other solutions. The Abraham family, such a powerful family, having been tormented by the full moon muttering for so long, should have found some methods to avoid or resist it. Compared to the blessing of a deity, contacting the Abraham family was clearly easier, although both were as difficult as flying to the sky for her. Firz closed the notebook, suppressing her emotions, and said leisurely, "What an interesting rumor. I think I already know how my story will develop. However, the Abraham family in this has given me some different inspiration." Could Miss Audrey describe them in more detail? Audrey had already confirmed that Firz was not a member of the Abraham family. Although Firz concealed it well, a spectator could easily discern her anxiety. "I'm sorry," Audrey said, "I only know that this is an ancient family that has existed since the fourth epoch. I'm not clear about the rest, but I will keep an eye out for you." "Thank you very much, Miss Audrey. Your kindness makes your beauty even more dazzling." Tingnan. Melissa, Melissa, Melissa. Colbert called Melissa many times before Melissa finally snapped back to reality. "Melissa, what's wrong with you?" Colbert frowned, asking with concern. "No, nothing," Melissa replied, looking down. "Do you need something?" "Huh." Colbert scratched his head, somewhat embarrassed, and looked back at his classmates huddled together behind him. After receiving their urging glances, he silently turned his head back and asked, "Did Teacher Eve really resign?" "She's only been working for less than 2 months. "Yes," Melissa replied blandly, her expression unchanged. Colbert was a little surprised by Melissa's attitude, as Melissa and Teacher Eve usually had a very good relationship. "Melissa, are you really all right?" "I'm fine." Melissa's tone became firm. "If there's nothing else, please leave. I need to study." Colbert opened his mouth, hesitated for a moment, and ultimately asked nothing. Chapter 157, There's a Problem. The Red Gloves training was very strict, making Klein once again experience the soreness he felt during his combat lessons. However, Klein's Beyonder knowledge was extremely rich. He had already mastered the knowledge taught in the Red Gloves Beyonder knowledge course, making it his easiest subject. Therefore, theory classes became Klein's favorite. In the evening, Klein, dragging his tired body, returned to 18 Minsk Street. After checking the mailbox in the yard and finding no letters, he entered the house. "I still have to hunt pirates," Klein thought, utterly exhausted. He just wanted to lie down in bed and sleep immediately. Eve was lying on the sofa, reading Wuthering Heights. Hearing the movement at the door, she looked up at Klein and said, "Dinner is ready." "Thanks," Klein said weakly, "but I don't have an appetite." "Look up first." Klein was a bit puzzled but still looked up at the dining table. Chinese food. Klein looked at the table full of Chinese dishes in disbelief, as if in a dream, wanting to rub his eyes in disbelief, but he didn't make that move. His appetite returned instantly. He quickly took 2 steps to the table. It was ordinary home-style cooking. 2 dishes and 1 soup, sour and spicy shredded potatoes, braised pork with potatoes, and tomato and egg drop soup, with steamed buns as the main staple. The scarcity of Loan cuisine had made him miserable, so how could he not be happy now to see Chinese food, which was quite competitive even in a world with abundant cuisine in his previous life. What's more, this was home cooking. Just thinking about the delicious foods he hadn't eaten in his previous life made Klein feel a pang of heartache. He only realized how precious they were when he lost them. Moreover, Klein wouldn't be able to eat them for a long time, as both Eve and he had relied on takeout in their previous lives and were not skilled at cooking. Klein pulled out a chair and sat down, eagerly picking up his chopsticks. He turned and asked, "Aren't you eating?" Of course. Eve closed her book, propped herself up on the sofa, rose, and came to the dining table, placing Wuthering Heights on it. "I made the food, so of course I'm going to eat it." Eve pulled out a chair, sat down, and picked up her chopsticks. Klein glanced at Eve and noticed the book in her hand was Wuthering Heights, immediately feeling a bit puzzled. Wuthering Heights? Didn't you just finish reading it last month? Are you rereading it so soon? Eve picked up Wuthering Heights, flipped to the title page, and showed it to Klein. On the light brown title page, a beautiful script read, "Fur's Wall." Rui brought it. Klein immediately understood, then noticed Rui wasn't home, and immediately asked, "Rui isn't home?" Eve nodded. "She's a vampire cat. Although she can eat normal food, it doesn't satiate her, she must drink blood. If she were to eat at home, there would be a strong smell of blood. I don't mind, but you might lose your appetite for dinner, so I put her in the mirror world." Klein paused, then asked with some hesitation. "The blood Rui drinks? Mainly hospital plasma, acquired through various channels." Before Klein could finish his sentence, Eve answered. Hearing this, Klein breathed a sigh of relief, picked up his chopsticks, and began to enjoy the delicious food. Due to the seasonings, the taste was a bit different from his previous life, but Klein was already very content. Eve touched her stomach. Mythical creatures do not need to eat, and although she ate a lot, she did not feel full. Klein leaned back in his chair, his hand resting on his abdomen. Because it had been so long since he last ate, he accidentally ate a bit too much, and his stomach felt uncomfortably full. He secretly rubbed his stomach, waited a while until he felt more comfortable, then stood up to clear the dishes. After tidying up, Klein returned to the living room and saw that Rui had also returned. Klein curved his lips, took 2 steps forward, and picked Rui up into his arms, stroking her fur at times and scratching her chin at others, making Rui purr contentedly. "I met Mei Gao Oc today," Klein said while petting Rui. "She's fine now. If she maintains her current state, she'll be back in Tingen in half a month." "That's good news," Eve said with a smile. Although Eve didn't say it, Klein could deduce that Eve had saved Mei Gao Oc, so Klein recounted his conversation with Mei Gao Oc to Eve in detail. "Baron Edgar has a problem," Eve said after 2 seconds of contemplation. "However, he definitely didn't participate in the Spawn of Evil God incident, he's an unwitting gentleman." As she spoke, Eve arranged the tea set, took out Earl Grey tea leaves, and brewed 2 cups of black tea. Klein paused, not expecting such a twist. "What kind of problem?" "I once, for some reason, assigned a task to investigate Baron Edgar's company. At the time, no anomalies were found, but Mickey seemed to have discovered something and has been investigating further," Eve said calmly, stirring her tea. Klein was instantly startled. What kind of matter would cause a king of angels to send someone to investigate him? Eve saw the undisguised surprise on Klein's face, took a sip of tea, and said, "You're overthinking it. He's just one of a group of people." "So that's it." Klein immediately felt relieved. The situation hadn't reached that level of seriousness. "What's wrong with Baron Edgar?" Klein asked. He didn't ask Eve for what reason she investigated others. When Eve mentioned some reason, he knew he wouldn't learn the truth from her. "You can investigate," Eve replied. Klein paused, then reacted and nodded. Eve had once told him that she would only give him two things, a net and a ladder. The ladder was for climbing up, and the net was to prevent falling into the abyss. The last time Eve was willing to help was because the matter had far exceeded Klein's capabilities. This time, Klein guessed that this matter should be within his capabilities, or at least within his capabilities in the early to mid stages. He shook his head, realizing that he was now subconsciously relying on his old sister. This was really not a good habit. Klein exhaled, calmed his emotions, and changed the subject. "Is Miss Mei Gao OC really okay now?" "Yes, the pollution on her has been eliminated." "That's good, but Miss Mei Gao OC's life won't be peaceful because of this. After all, she joined the Nighthawks," Klein said indignantly, thinking of the mastermind who almost killed so many innocent people. "That spectator is a real bastard." More accurately, it should be Ince Zhangwil who's the real bastard, since he wrote the script," Eve mused, stroking her chin. "Ince Zhangwil. That wanted criminal." Klein's eyes widened instantly. He looked at Eve in disbelief. "Wait, so the other existence, that high-level spectator. It's 008. Eve's tone was calm, but in Klein's ears, it was like a clap of thunder. "Is 008 in your hands?" Klein immediately asked. "No. So, it's in the hands of the existence who killed Ince Zhangwil." Klein immediately felt a headache. His intuition told him that the person who killed Ince Zhangwil in front of Eve was definitely also a high-level existence. "Yes," Eve said, as if she could read minds, adding, "and you absolutely won't be able to get it back." Klein, who had just opened his mouth, closed it again. He did want to ask that question. Although he knew the chances were slim, it was a sealed artifact of the Church of the Night, a grade 0 sealed artifact. He had to try no matter what. "Don't worry," Eve patted Klein's shoulder, comforting him. "The Night may not even want you to retrieve 008. Klein froze, staring blankly at Eve. "What? Just a guess." Eve withdrew her hand, smiled, and pointed to the window. "It's completely dark now. Let's go. Your bounty is still waiting for you." Klein followed Eve's finger, but the curtains completely blocked his view of the outside. Chapter 158, The Hunt. Eve placed her hand on Klein's shoulder and teleported with him to Rhodes Islands. There was no curfew on Rhodes Islands at night, unlike the silence of LotM, but there were far fewer people than during the day. As they walked down the street, they occasionally saw a drunkard passed out on the ground. After walking about 500 meters, Klein and Eve saw a full-sack strongman, nearly 2 meters tall. His 2-meter height made him particularly conspicuous. His greasy golden hair looked like it hadn't been washed in a long time, and his appearance was ordinary, with a long knife scar on his left cheek extending from his eyebrow all the way to above the bridge of his nose. This was Klein's target for the night's hunt, Robert Dickinson. This was a long-prepared hunt. Klein had specially marked him when he first selected his hunting targets. Standing in front of Robert Dickinson was a scantily clad, black-haired woman. Her slender hand rested lightly on Robert Dickinson's thick arm, her fingers continuously sliding slowly down his arm, with a subtle, alluring tease. Klein sniffed, and the strong smell of alcohol and the stench of vomit immediately made him hold his breath. With both drunkards and taverns around, Klein couldn't determine Robert Dickinson's level of intoxication by smell alone, but from Robert Dickinson's appearance, he seemed to have drunk a lot but hadn't lost consciousness. Experienced and cautious pirates would not allow themselves to become corpses, lying on the street, otherwise they might become actual corpses. Their bounties were still hanging on the wall, and there were adventurers everywhere who wanted to exchange their heads for rewards. Klein did not continue forward, maintaining a certain distance from Robert Dickinson to avoid being discovered. He saw Robert Dickinson laugh heartily with great satisfaction, his thick arm pulling the woman by the waist. One hand wandered over her body, causing the woman to giggle constantly. The dark-skinned woman was likely mixed race, with deep features that possessed a unique charm. She wore a black spaghetti strap mini dress that didn't cover her thighs. She was about 1.70 meters tall, but appeared exceptionally petite in front of the 2-meter Robert. The huge height difference allowed Robert to look down and see a beautiful sight. The woman's eyes were slightly upturned, her gaze clinging to Robert like honey. One hand rested on her chest, moving gently downwards, causing the fabric at her chest to slide down, further revealing the beautiful sight to the man's eyes. Robert felt his blood surge, the alcohol fueling his desires, wanting only to unleash all his strength and lust immediately. But even open-minded pirates would not want to be watched while doing such things. Robert wrapped his arm around her slender waist and walked towards the tavern he had booked. Klein suddenly felt a bit awkward. For a moment, he didn't know whether to follow or not. Although he knew that pirates, after coming ashore, would all seek out such places or streetwalkers for pleasure, this was his first time encountering it in progress. After 2 seconds of hesitation, Klein lifted his foot and followed. After all, people's vigilance is always lower than usual when doing such things, which was advantageous to him. It was just a pity for that innocent girl, who was about to be startled. Eve quickened her steps to catch up with Klein. Klein didn't say anything, and the two walked down the street as usual. Eve sometimes watched his hunts, but more often, she drank in taverns. They quickened their pace, passing by Robert. The magician's nimble hands allowed Klein to easily take a low and 1-penny copper coin from Robert's pocket without him noticing. After getting the copper coin, Klein and Eve walked a few dozen meters in their original direction before immediately turning to another place. Klein casually broke off a branch from a roadside tree, cleaned off the twigs, and fashioned it into a simple magic wand. He held the copper penny in his left hand and began to divine. The two followed the direction indicated by the magic wand and arrived beneath Robert's tavern. Eve sniffed, detecting a cheap perfume smell from a room on the 2nd floor, the woman's scent, and pointed to that room on the 2nd floor for Klein. Klein's 5 senses were not as sharp as Eve's, but at such close range, he could still smell the perfume. However, when they first met, to avoid being discovered by Robert, Klein hadn't gotten close and hadn't smelled the black-haired woman's perfume. Moreover, there was more than one room here, and Robert wasn't the only one spending a wonderful night. All sorts of cheap perfume smells mixed together were a disaster for the nose. He also had a way to find the target's room, but it would take some time. Eve saw Klein nod to her, lowered her hand, and watched Klein pull out matches, quickly light and extinguish them. Holding the extinguished matches in her hand, she nimbly climbed the wall and dropped the extinguished matches into the room one by one. The strong perfume scent perfectly masked the smell of the matches. Klein pulled a tarot card from his pocket, hid beside the window, and fixed his eyes on the man's neck inside the room. Swish! A world card flew out, shooting straight towards Robert's throat. In an instant, Robert's hair stood on end. Without time to think, his body instinctively swerved to the right. The tarot card grazed his neck, swept over the woman, and firmly embedded itself in the wall. Faced with the sudden attack, Robert did not panic. Instead, he sneered, pushed away the woman who was terrified, speechless and trembling all over, and tried to pull out a short halberd from under the pillow. Swish! Another tarot card flew in, heading towards Robert's hand, reaching for the pillow. As he threw the tarot card, Klein hooked one foot onto the windowsill, released his hand from the pipe he was clinging to, and entered the room. Another adventurer come to die. Robert sneered. Although he hadn't gotten his weapon, Robert was confident in his own strength and would never be defeated by some greenhorn who appeared out of nowhere. Moreover, Robert was confident he could get his weapon. Kid, you must be new. Robert had never heard of or seen such an adventurer before. Adventurers capable of challenging him usually had some fame at sea. Grandpa will teach you a lesson in life. Next time you see me, remember to bow down and bark twice. Klein was not affected by his taunts. He thought calmly, a warrior without his weapon would have greatly reduced combat power. The obvious tension scared the woman into silence, only able to desperately cover her mouth to prevent herself from screaming. She wanted to live, she didn't want to be killed for disturbing the two gentlemen. Eve stood outside the tavern, leaning against the wall, bored, listening to the commotion inside. Loud noises came from the room, even without enhanced senses, they were audible. But in less than 3 minutes, the commotion had ended. How fast? Eve thought, while nimbly jumping onto the second-floor windowsill. By now, Robert was already a corpse, a deep bloodstain on his neck indicating his cause of death. Need to deal with this quickly, someone will come to check soon. Klein thought to himself. And that lady, if she's left here, she might be abused and killed by angry pirates. Sir, please don't kill me. The woman saw Klein look at her, immediately knelt on the bed, pleading incessantly. She tore off the strap of her camisole and cried, "Sir, I can do anything, please don't kill me. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid." A sweet female voice suddenly appeared in their ears. Klein looked over at the sound and saw a brown-haired girl with a gentle appearance jump in from the windowsill, and he was momentarily dazed. Because this girl actually resembled his brother by 5 parts. "We are just ordinary adventurers, we won't harm you." The woman looked at the girl, who appeared to be only 15 or 16, sniffed, and shrank back, but her body was no longer trembling. Eve chuckled lightly, her gentle face radiating great warmth. She collected Robert's corpse into the mirror world, then walked directly to the girl, picked her up by the waist, and simultaneously grabbed a small blanket from the bed to cover her. Although it was the height of summer, the night wind was still quite cold. "Let's go," Eve turned to Klein and said. Klein nodded. After this series of events, he already knew who the girl in front of him was. The two didn't delay at all, jumping directly out of the window. The black-haired woman was too scared to speak, only clutching the small blanket, trying her best to minimize her presence. Once they reached an uninhabited place, Eve finally put the black-haired woman down. The woman wrapped the blanket tightly around herself, looking timidly at the two. "Sir, don't be afraid," Klein comforted, "we need you to do one thing." The black-haired woman's face instantly paled. She bit her lower lip and nodded slightly. Eve entered the mirror space, cut off Robert's head, placed it in a wooden box, and reappeared before the two. He handed her the wooden box and said, "Inside is Robert's head. His bounty is 200 LotM gold pounds, not including bounties from other countries. Tomorrow, you take it to claim the bounty, and your reward will be 10 pounds. To prevent retaliation, many adventurers would have others claim their bounties for them." The black-haired woman's eyes widened instantly. She looked nervously at Eve, then at Klein, unable to believe it was true, her eyes welling up with tears. Klein felt a pang of complicated emotions upon seeing this. If one had a choice, who would willingly sell their flesh and soul? Thank you. The black-haired girl slowly curled up, tears streaming down her face. Her long black hair was soaked with tears, clinging to her cheeks, but she seemed completely unaware, only sobbing, "Thank you." "You're welcome," Eve said, a sweet smile gracing her gentle and beautiful face. "You take the box and go first. Let's meet here tomorrow night." This was a necessary security measure. The black-haired woman nodded, reached out, and haphazardly wiped her face twice, then hid the wooden box in her blanket and turned to leave. Klein watched the black-haired woman's retreating back, then turned his head and asked, "Isn't that lady a bit too calm?" Although she was terrified and speechless when Klein killed Robert Dickinson, she showed no shock when she saw the Beyonder powers Klein and the others used. He knew that Beyonder abilities weren't as strictly hidden at sea as they were elsewhere, but they weren't exactly semi-public either. Would an ordinary lady like her know about Beyonders? "She's half an assassin," Eve replied. "Half an assassin?" Klein was a little surprised. No wonder she wasn't surprised by Beyonders. But assassins were agile, and even half an assassin would have better physical qualities than ordinary people. She shouldn't have fallen to this state. Never mind. Klein shook his head, no longer thinking about it. He hoped she could live a normal life with those 10 pounds. Klein pulled his thoughts back and turned to look at Eve. Eve still maintained a face similar to Zhou Mingzhen's. Although this appearance wasn't as beautiful as Eve's original face, it gave Klein an even greater shock of his older brother becoming an older sister. Thinking of this, Klein's gaze gradually became complex. Since no one else was present, Klein didn't need to maintain Gehrman's cold persona, and his emotions were directly displayed on his face. Eve noticed Klein's gaze, reached out a finger, poked her cheek, and said with a smile, "This will make that girl feel more at ease." At ease. Klein repeated with some confusion. Although Eve's current appearance was more approachable, her original appearance was also gentle, and her approachability wasn't weak. Eve nodded and explained, "When beauty reaches a certain level, it is itself a kind of extraordinary. If you see a woman with beauty beyond imagination, what is your first reaction?" "Ah, demoness." Klein thought for 2 seconds and answered uncertainly. "See. Your first reaction also doesn't consider such a woman an ordinary person," Eve said, placing her hand on Klein's shoulder. She had restored her original face, a face so extraordinarily beautiful that it was enough to drive any man in the world mad for her. No wonder Eve would deliberately lower her presence. Suddenly, a question popped into Klein's mind. "Why don't you hide your appearance?" Klein asked strangely. Old sister obviously didn't want others to notice her beauty by lowering her presence, but this method had flaws. Because as long as one noticed her, one could see her appearance, although it would be difficult for them to remember her after Eve left their sight. This was evident from how Eve's good reputation spread throughout the entire class, and even began to expand, within 2 months of her teaching at Melissa's school. Wouldn't directly changing her appearance be a simpler and more effective method? Directly changing one's appearance cannot weaken the demoness's charm's influence on others. An ordinary appearance will not reduce the demoness's allure. The surrounding environment began to change, the colors of everything becoming deeper and richer, like an oil painting. Eve said this while leading Klein through the spirit world. If a demoness's bewitchment is an active skill, then charm is a permanent buff. Of course, I can also lower my presence while changing my appearance, but... At this point, Eve paused. The world had returned to its original state, and they were in the living room. Eve took her hand off Klein's shoulder, turned, and said, "A friend of mine told me I would meet you here, so I wished to meet you with my true face." Klein was stunned for a moment, then looked down at Eve, his eyes filled with surprise and emotion. The emotion lasted for a full 10 seconds before Klein suddenly noticed the friend Eve mentioned. "Friend?" Klein asked, puzzled, somewhat suspecting if this friend was Eve herself, but this thought was immediately dismissed by Klein himself because there was no need at all. She prophesied the location of our meeting," Eve nodded. "It was because of this prophecy that I lived in Backland for more than 10 years. Klein was a little surprised. So it wasn't a coincidence that they met. Eve had finally waited for him. "I'm sorry," Klein said guiltily, "I must have made you wait a long time." "Indeed, over 3,000 years," Eve sighed, but her tone was calm and gentle, carrying a kind of open-mindedness that came from having weathered countless storms and now looking back with a smile. "Sometimes I even thought her prophecy was wrong and really wanted to drag her out to prophesy again." "So would the prophecy be the same again?" Klein's lips moved a few times as he asked. "No," Eve said. "I didn't really go to her for another prophecy. She had already fallen back then, she had already fallen during the third epoch." "Fallen?" Klein's eyes widened slightly, and he immediately felt a little flustered, worried that he had poked at Eve's wound again, but soon he noticed that there was no sadness on Eve's face, only a trace of emotion and remembrance. In an instant, Klein breathed a sigh of relief. To be able to prophesy something 3,000 years into the future, old sister's friend must also be a high-level existence. The third epoch, the age of glory, who knows what happened to cause a high-level existence to fall? Could it be the Great Calamity? The waters of the Great Calamity might be deeper than he imagined. Klein didn't voice his question. Although Eve's grief had been smoothed over by time, the death of an old friend must be hard to let go of. Eve noticed Klein's abnormality but didn't pay attention, continuing, "What she gave me back then wasn't a place name, but a painting." I still have it, would you like to see it?" Klein nodded. Eve led Klein to the storage room she had opened up in the mirror world and took out a framed painting from a box labeled, Michael. Klein took 2 steps forward, not daring to touch the painting, fearing he would damage it. Normally, after 3,000 years, this paper would have long ceased to exist, thanks to Eve preserving it, but Klein didn't know how strong Eve's preservation effect was and was worried about accidentally damaging this relic of Eve's old friend. He leaned his head to look at the painting in Eve's hand. It wasn't exquisite. The paper depicted many European-style buildings with factory chimneys in the background, a distinct Victorian style, very similar to many cities in LotM, but some details showed that this was Backland. Chapter 160, Chapter 158 Mr. Door. Klein's lips moved a few times, and he silently withdrew his gaze. Eve must have spent a lot of time and effort to find Backland. Actually, it's not difficult, Eve said, putting the painting back into the box. You just need to do a divination. Huh. Klein was stunned for 2 seconds, he shouldn't have said it out loud. Your eyes, Eve made a scissor gesture and slid it past her eyes, raising an eyebrow and saying, I know what you're thinking without even asking. Am I that obvious? Klein subconsciously touched his face. He was quite confident in his ability to hide his emotions. Eve ignored Klein, turned around, pressed the lid shut, and repasted the note onto the box. Let's go back, she said. Klein nodded and immediately followed Eve's steps. Tomorrow, he wouldn't need to attend training. Although he had changed positions, he still had 1 day off per week before officially becoming a Red Gloves. However, once the training ended and he officially started Red Gloves missions, Klein's days off would be very irregular. He would be very leisurely when idle, but truly busy when things picked up. Klein returned to his room, lay on his side on the bed, and reviewed the training content in his mind. Then he recalled the events of the day, and suddenly, he discovered a suspicious point. Eve said she used her true appearance because of him, but in Mr. Azek's previous lives, Eve also used her own appearance. Klein suddenly sat up, stroked his chin, thought for a few seconds, and then slowly lay back down. Mr. Azek used to be an angel, so old sister using her true appearance on him doesn't seem like a suspicious point. I'll find a time to ask. The next day. Because he didn't need to go to work, Klein had ample free time. Eve took Klein to a well-reputed clothing store in Backland and bought a new silver-inlaid cane. After buying the cane, the two of them went to a restaurant for lunch. This was their first meal of the day, which could also be called breakfast, but chronologically, Klein and Eve still classified it as lunch. After lunch, Eve took Klein to wander the streets, familiarizing themselves with Backland's routes, and only returned home after 2 o'clock. Eve watched Klein ascend Saphira Castle, then immediately took 4 counterclockwise steps and entered Saphira Castle. Sitting on the bronze chair, she looked through the gray fog and saw streaks of red light surging, followed by 1 female and 2 male figures appearing above the gray fog. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. After 2 weeks, Audrey's sweet voice once again appeared above the gray fog. After Audrey and everyone greeted each other, Hanged Man immediately raised his hand and said, Mr. Fool, I have obtained 19 pages of Rosal's diary this time. Here, I must thank you for sending your dependents to help me eliminate Kilangos. These diary pages are the remuneration I should pay. Speaking of this, Alger thought of Kilangos's tragic death. The Archbishop's words, at least 2 demigods, seemed to still echo in his ears, and his expression became even more respectful. This is the principle of equivalent exchange, Klein replied indifferently. I should also find a way to reward old sister and Mr. Azek, Klein thought silently in his heart, but with his current abilities, he couldn't come up with anything that would interest them. I'll work harder to help Mr. Azek find his past. That's all he can do. As for old sister, he currently hasn't seen any demands from her, and he truly has no direction to start. As expected of Mr. Fool, he doesn't even care about such a powerful pirate general. It seems I shouldn't mention the bounty. I can't insult Mr. Fool with money, Audrey thought happily in her heart. She felt a strong sense of belonging to the tarot club and was genuinely happy for its strength. Hearing the fool's reply, Hanged Man Alger humbly said, "My current memory limit is 6 pages. Please allow me to give them to you in several installments." Klein nodded gently, indicating his agreement. Pages filled with characters appeared above the gray fog, and Klein, with a wave of his hand, had them all in his grasp. Derek looked enviously at the pages filled with writing. These were items that interested a god and could be traded with a god. If he could also find some, he might be able to obtain more information beneficial to the City of Silver. Klein's gaze shifted to the pages and began to read Rosal's diary. December 16th, I re-established contact with that poor fellow trapped in the depths of the storm, lost in the darkness. Another continuation of a previous page of notes, Klein's heart rejoiced, and he became even more focused. He called himself Mr. Door, and he tried to teach me a complicated and difficult ritual, asking me to help him return to the real world, promising to fulfill 3 of my requests. Did he think I was stupid? I've lived for over 60 years across 2 lifetimes, couldn't I tell this was a typical tactic of evil gods and devils? But some of the history of the 4th epoch he described was truly fascinating. Mr. Door. Klein's first thought was of the ancestor of the Abraham family, the angel Bethel Abraham, who existed in the 3rd epoch. Eve had once told him in class that this angel was also called Mr. Door, but she hadn't said anything more. I wonder if the 2 Mr. Doors are the same Mr. Door. He told me a lot about the War of the 4 Emperors. The Underworld Emperor gained the most benefit. However, I already knew this information, and he seemed a bit surprised by it, asking me how I knew. I thought for 2 seconds, hesitating whether to tell him about Eve, but in the end, I didn't. After all, I didn't know if the 2 of them had any grievances, and I, Rosal, would never betray a friend. Klein's fingers gently tapped the armrest, willing to lessen a tiny bit of the resentment in his heart caused by Rosal wanting to be his old sister's husband. I just told him directly that I wouldn't tell him, and seeing his surprised expression actually felt a bit satisfying. However, he didn't seem to mind my provocative behavior and was willing to continue sharing the history of the 4th epoch with me. I guess he wanted to pique my interest and get me to complete that ritual for him. I'm not an idiot. Even if he tells me everything, I won't help him complete that ritual. He continued to tell me that after over 100 years of digestion, Death went mad, but also became stronger, and thus teamed up with the primordial demoness to bring a pale calamity to the northern continent. Of course, this was not something he witnessed or experienced personally, but rather content he overheard when he approached the real world each month. Primordial demoness. Klein looked at Primordial Demoness, written in black ink on the page. The Primordial Demoness and the Chaos Demoness should not be the same person. He just didn't know if the Primordial Demoness at that time had been replaced by Eve. He privately hoped not. Death went mad, but also became stronger. That's truly a chilling statement. But if you think about it, gods are just powerful beyonders, and beyonders all have the possibility of losing control. Contrary to my expectations, Mr. Door not only didn't criticize or curse my thoughts, but seemed quite pleased. He told me that he didn't believe in any gods, he believed in himself. It's hard to imagine such a person appearing in a world like this. I even started to suspect he was another fellow transmigrator. I tried to exchange a few secret codes with him. He only matched 1 or 2, but that was still very telling. Great joy overwhelmed me, and I truly wanted to complete the ritual immediately to rescue him. But Mr. Door's overly calm attitude quickly cooled my heated head. This truly didn't resemble the reaction of 2 fellow transmigrators meeting. I tentatively asked him how he knew these things, and Mr. Door told me that a friend of his sometimes said strange things, and he found them interesting enough to remember. I immediately asked him who his friend was, and Mr. Door told me that she was known as the Chaos Demoness. It was Eve after all. I was happy for nothing. It seems the current Emperor Rosal already knows that Eve is the Chaos Demoness. I then asked about the Primordial Demoness. Eve is the chaos demoness, so that primordial demoness should also be a high-level existence of the demoness pathway. I asked him what the relationship between the two was. Klein paused, then reread the passage. The time should have been before the opening of new sea routes, otherwise Emperor Rosal would not have been unaware that the chaos demoness was the primordial demoness. Mr. Dor said meaningfully that, in a certain sense, there is no longer a conflict between the current primordial demoness and the chaos demoness. What does no conflict mean? Did the two reconcile? Or has one of them fallen? But since Mr. Dor emphasized, in a certain sense, then both of these outcomes might be incorrect. I continued to ask what conflicts existed between the two beings back then. Mr. Dor said that if I were to ask Eve directly, she would also be willing to tell me. It seems he already guessed that Eve told me those fourth epic histories. What a joke. Of course, I'll ask both. Eve is like toothpaste, she squeezes out a little and says a little. Beyonder knowledge and hidden histories are never withheld, but she never actively offers them unless asked. It seems there are differences in treatment between students. Klein recalled Eve, who tutored him, secretly glanced down, then quickly averted his gaze. Eve felt Klein's gaze, turned her head to look at the figure at the top, saw him looking at the diary in his hand, then withdrew her gaze. Mr. Dor smiled and told me that only one of them could survive. As expected, the primordial demoness and Eve should have been in a sequence struggle. Judging from the current situation, I guess Eve gained the upper hand. Such a huge amount of information. Klein sighed silently. The primordial demoness and old sister had such a relationship. That was also within expectations. It's just a pity I don't know whether the primordial demoness who caused the pale disaster was indeed replaced by Eve. Klein privately felt she wasn't. This didn't seem like something old sister would do. But Klein dared not imagine how much 3,000 years could change a person. To this day, he dared not ask Eve about the war during Rosal's era. He was afraid he couldn't bear the truth. Klein pulled back his thoughts and quickly flipped through the later diary entries. September 10th, I've held it in for a long time, but I still can't help but complain a few words. Was I out of my mind when I chose the savant pathway? Of course, it can indeed bring out my greatest strengths and make me valued by the church, but the problem is that several of its early sequences lack practical Beyonder abilities for combat. I can only make do with mystical items, relying too much on external things. Klein silently felt sorry for the great emperor for 2 seconds. If he had taken the potion a little later, he would have had more choices. Klein recalled Emperor Rosal's previous envy of Eve's assassin pathway and his crush on Eve, and suddenly felt a little regret that Rosal didn't become a demoness. Among the 22 pathways, the demoness's combat power is also good, and it can also improve one's appearance, it's just that it changes one's gender and has a relatively large impact on personality. However, Klein imagined Emperor Rosal after a gender change, and his first reaction was actually Miss Tequila. No. With a demoness's looks, Emperor Rosal should be an objectively beautiful woman. Klein suppressed his smile, argued with himself in his mind, threw out the jumbled thoughts, and continued reading. For example, Sequence 9 Feet Savant only has the Beyonder characteristics of memory, learning, and practical abilities. For example, Sequence 8 Feet Archaeologist gains a strong physique and corresponding ancient knowledge. Sequence 5 Astrologer. The early stages of the Savant pathway indeed lack direct combat power. Klein thought to himself, fortunately, I left the sailor's bracelet for Melissa, which should give her some self-preservation ability. I hope she hasn't thrown away the bracelet. Klein suppressed the emotions in his heart and continued reading. It's heaven have mercy, I only barely passed the second-tier university entrance exam. Emperor Rosal has a strange talent for humor. Klein complained in his heart, using it to distract himself. June 2nd, the kingdom repeatedly creates chaos and provokes battles, yet it cannot thoroughly defeat the Fasak Empire. This is my opportunity. I must be sufficiently cautious. The Sauron family is an ancient family that witnessed the fourth epoch, a family with angels. I have gained the support of the Church and reached a certain understanding with the Eternal Blazing Sun Church. Eve also expressed her support for me. In addition, she requested the Conqueror characteristic held by the Sauron family. She hoped that I would do my best to help her acquire that characteristic. If I couldn't get it, Eve would still be willing to support me. In this matter, she was already supportive. I cannot. Rosal Gustav, Consul. I like this title. June 3rd Road. Perhaps I should give some help to those rebels, but how to do it covertly, how to make others undetectable. June 4th, Zeratul of the Hermetic Order secretly came to visit me, very suddenly. And then, what was Zeratul's purpose in looking for you, Comrade Rosal? Old Sister also participated in the coup back then. This was within Klein's expectations. If it were him, he would also participate. This was an anti-feudal struggle, which Chinese rabbit wouldn't participate. Also, the Conqueror characteristic. Conqueror. Is this the name of the Demoness Sequence 1? Klein thought as he flipped 2 pages back. The next 2 pages contained daily content and no mention of Zeratul. The diary ended abruptly, as if the power suddenly went out during the climax of a movie. Klein's piqued interest was immediately doused with a bucket of cold water. Sigh. Klein sighed in his heart. This feeling reminded him of the free bookstore he used to visit as a child. He often read comics there, but those comics were incomplete, and he always read them in bits and pieces, out of order, having to piece together the correct plot sequence himself. The last page contained similar content, with no other useful information except for the last sentence, where Emperor Rosal's investigation into the Hermetic Order somewhat lifted his spirits. You may now communicate freely. Klein said calmly. Derek immediately looked at Eve, eagerly reporting, Miss Empress, the first team to explore the giant court has returned to the City of Silver. Audrey and Alger, hearing this, couldn't help but prick up their ears and listen. This was news from the legendary Forsaken Land of the Gods. Chapter 162, Recommendation. The City of Silver had previously explored the giant court, but found nothing substantial. This time, the City of Silver's exploration team explored other areas. Derek deliberated for 2 seconds, organizing his words before reporting in detail. I haven't received specific news from the City of Silver's exploration team, but it seems there have been no discoveries. Miss Eve was not surprised. True surprises would only appear after deeper exploration. She nodded and instructed, continue to observe. Miss Empress, how far do we need to explore, and what do we need to find, to discover hope? Derek's lips moved twice, and after hesitating for 2 seconds, he asked. He wanted to try and extract some useful information for the City of Silver, but the child, who rarely even lied in daily life, was full of nervousness and guilt when trying to extract information, making his intentions obvious at a glance. Alger and Miss Audrey immediately pricked up their ears. I'm sorry, Miss Empress. Derek thought with guilt in his heart. After all, in this special gathering, knowledge and information could be traded, and Miss Empress had already freely given the City of Silver an important piece of information. I am willing to trade Beander materials or a potion formula. In the end, unable to overcome his guilt and nervousness, Derek stammered out this sentence. Potion formula, speaking of which, Miss Empress still hasn't purchased a formula at the Tarot Club. What pathway is she on? It's really curious. Miss Audrey maintained her elegant smile on the surface, but in reality, her mind was wandering. And Alger had similar thoughts. Among the members of this Tarot Club, only the Empress's pathway was unknown, which made Alger particularly concerned. Miss Eve looked around, taking in everyone's reactions. She chuckled and said, I told you, the hope of leaving the Forsaken Land of the Gods lies within the giant court. As for what is discovered or not discovered during the exploration, it is not important. Continue exploring towards the giant court, and you will find the truth you desire. Truth? Derek was stunned for a second, then slowly lowered his head, his lips tightly pressed. His slightly childish face was hidden in the gray fog, making his expression unreadable. Little Son seems a bit disappointed, Miss Audrey silently closed her mouth, not mentioning that she hadn't found a Sun Pathway Sequence 8 formula yet. Although she could still buy it from Miss Eve, the overly short time would expose that Sun knew the acting method, leading to more trouble, and even the risk of exposing the existence of the Tarot Club. Of course, she could also deceive Miss Eve, claiming that the person buying the formula was not the same, but this was too coincidental to not raise suspicion. Moreover, facing a high-level existence who might have lived for thousands of years, Miss Audrey had to be cautious. Unless there was no other way, she would not buy a formula from Miss Eve in a short period. Alger, unlike Miss Audrey and Derek, thought more deeply. The Hanged Man was very clear that the Empress was the Fool's spokesperson at the Tarot Club. Her words were, to some extent, equivalent to the Fool's words. Did the Empress really only want to help them by asking the City of Silver to enter the giant court? No, Alger was more willing to believe that there was something they wanted in the giant court, and they had their own goals. And the Empress's words once again confirmed Alger's guess. They didn't care about the process, only the result. Klein also glanced at Miss Eve, but immediately withdrew his gaze the moment he looked at her. Discover what? Klein clearly remembered that the Forsaken Land of the Gods was formed due to the Great Calamity. So, does the giant court, which hides the method to leave the Forsaken Land of the Gods, also hide the truth of the Great Calamity? According to the epics of the Third Epic and the current creation myths, the Great Calamity is absolutely very profound. Above the gray fog, a brief silence fell. For a moment, everyone fell into their own thoughts. Miss Audrey looked left and right, hesitated for 2 seconds, and actively broke the silence on Saphira Castle. Mr. Fool, I have found 2 ladies suitable for our Tarot Club. They are both Beyonders, have their own circles and resources in Backland, are sufficiently secretive, and have good personalities. Are you willing to let them join the gathering? These 2 Beyonders were naturally Zio and Furs. After deep thought, Miss Audrey decided not to recommend Sherman to join the Tarot Club. She suspected Sherman was a member of a secret organization. Although it had not yet been confirmed, to be safe, Miss Audrey decided to temporarily remove Sherman from the list. Upon hearing Miss Audrey's request, Alger immediately frowned. Does Justice want to expand her influence in the Tarot Club? Son Derek showed some interest in this, and he turned his head, awaiting the Fool's reply. Miss Eve's gaze lingered on Miss Audrey for a second before slowly retracting. Her initial positioning for the Tarot Club was an organization directly under Zhou Mingrui, and whether the members knew each other was not a concern to her. Or rather, Miss Eve never believed that the situation of the Tarot Club members not knowing each other would continue indefinitely. Klein was slightly troubled. In his previous vision, the members of the Tarot Club should not know each other, and then each would develop certain subordinates, forming a relatively strict organizational structure. This way, even if a member was exposed, captured, or divined, it would not have too much impact on the Tarot Club. Miss Eve glanced at Klein, understanding his concerns. The current Tarot Club was still weak, and there was indeed a risk of being captured. In the future, after the Tarot Club grew stronger, these members would all be high-ranking members of the Tarot Club, and such concerns would naturally diminish greatly. Klein tapped his forehead twice, activating his spirit vision to observe his surroundings. He specifically avoided Miss Eve. On Saphira Castle, his spirit vision would be greatly enhanced, and looking at Miss Eve under such circumstances would likely lead to him losing control directly. Mr. Hanged Man's astral body is blue, which means he is calmly thinking, with some dark colors mixed in. Dark colors represent melancholy, silence, and sadness. Miss Audrey, on the other hand, is yellow, representing happiness and extroversion. Klein tapped his forehead again, closing his spirit vision, and gently tapped the armrest, deep in thought. One of the 2 ladies Miss Justice mentioned should be the one who might have connections with the Abraham family, perhaps related to Mr. Dorr. Although the Abraham family has declined, snatching someone from a 4th epic angel family still made Klein a bit nervous. After a moment of thought, he said, "This requires some investigation. Miss Justice, use a discreet method that doesn't expose yourself to let them know my name and become interested in it." Yes, Mr. Fool. Seeing her suggestion accepted, Miss Audrey immediately said excitedly. After everyone chatted for a while, Klein announced the end of the meeting and cut off the connection. Chapter 163, 8 William Street. After the meeting, Eve also left Saphira Castle. I need to rush my manuscript. Don't disturb me unless it's important, Eve said to Klein, turning her head as she stepped onto the stairs. I won't be eating dinner. Make your own or go to a restaurant. I thought you didn't have to work, Klein said with a feigned look of surprise. After all, you're usually quite idle, and a journalist is a respectable but busy job. Eve naturally understood Klein's unspoken meaning. Her procrastination was beyond saving, she had given up on treatment in her previous life. She rolled her eyes rather ungracefully, leaning her elbow on the stair railing and half resting against the banister. You can just call me lazy, I don't mind, but I will hit you. Klein immediately shut his mouth. Eve snorted lightly, then said, if you're very idle, you can go take a look at 8 William Street. 8 William Street, Klein repeated, puzzled. William Street was at the border of West District and Empress Borough. 8 William Street was closer to Empress Borough, and houses there cost at least £5,000. Is there a problem with that villa? Klein asked. Perhaps. Eve's answer was vague. William Street was where Medici had fallen back then. According to Eve's speculation, the exact location of the ruins should be at 8 William Street. Eve had investigated when Medici fell, but she hadn't found anything. Among those who participated in the hunt for Medici, only Alistair Tudor could have completely concealed any abnormalities from Eve. Deification brings a qualitative change. A king of angels is the closest existence to a true god, but ultimately not a true god. And other participants, even if they could conceal something, couldn't do it so perfectly. But now, if Medici truly still existed, Eve suspected Adam more. Adam could mobilize the power of the Chaos Sea, and combined with the advantage of his pathway, he could indeed perfectly conceal this matter. If Medici was truly still alive, then Adam had fooled Truncest and many high-level existences in Truncest's capital. No, Knight might have known. Is this a movie with 3 people where only I don't have a name? Eve thought with a hint of self-mockery. Perhaps. Klein said jokingly, then there's definitely a problem. Eve smiled noncommittally. Even if Medici was truly alive, she didn't think Zhou Mingrui could see anything, or rather, Zhou Mingrui couldn't see it before she became a god. She just hoped he would go take a look. Thinking of this, a sense of absurdity suddenly struck her, making Eve feel exceptionally ridiculous. Pure divinity, absolute rationality, Adam only did what was beneficial to him. If Cheek becoming a demoness was more beneficial to him, Eve believed he would sacrifice herself just as he sacrificed Medici. There was no such thing as friendship. She wasn't Michael, nor even Adam. Eve straightened up, holding the banister with both hands, and said jokingly, if there's really a problem, the house prices will drop, right? Not necessarily, maybe the problem hasn't erupted yet. Wait, you're not thinking of buying the house at 8 William Street, are you? Klein was startled. That house would cost at least £5,000, and that didn't include furniture and servant expenses. More importantly, 8 William Street was looking for a buyer. Thinking of the exorbitant price, Klein felt a surge of envy. No wonder you told me to go look there. That's truly a beautiful dream, Zhou Mingrui, but wake up, I'm just an ordinary little journalist, Eve said, clapping her hands in front of her chest in an exaggerated manner. Ordinary little journalist. Klein felt there were too many things to pick apart in that statement. Leaving aside whether Eve's identity as a king of angels had anything to do with ordinary, even from an ordinary person's perspective, being a journalist for the Backland Daily couldn't be called ordinary, as the Backland Daily was a major newspaper covering the entire Loan Kingdom. If I want to place an advertisement in the Backland Daily, how many pounds would it cost? Klein retracted his thoughts and asked instead. Eve raised an eyebrow, didn't ask why, and replied directly, the fee is based on factors like the ad's position and size. Advertisements are an important source of income for newspapers. The more influential the newspaper, the more expensive the ad. For a major newspaper like the Backland Daily, it would cost at least £10. So expensive. Although he knew it would be expensive, Klein was still surprised by the price. Klein hesitated for a moment, then frowned and asked, "Is there any way for me to quickly enter the aristocratic circle?" "Become an aristocrat," Eve said jokingly. "As long as you have enough money, you can buy a title, though the old aristocrats will mock you for it." "That's more than £10. Klein immediately rejected the suggestion without hesitation. "My savings are short by a few zeros." "Still a detective," Klein said after 2 seconds of thought. "I'll go to the newspaper office with you later. There's also the identity verification for my new identity, but that's not urgent." Klein planned to investigate Baron Edgar and needed a non-official identity that could access the nobility. Most non-official identities that could enter the aristocratic circle were difficult to obtain. Finally, Klein favored only 3: author, journalist, and private detective. These 3 professions all had relatively flexible working hours, wouldn't conflict with Klein's main profession, and could also interact with people from all social strata. However, any of them required considerable fame to enter the aristocratic circle. Klein first ruled out author because Emperor Rosal had already plagiarized everything that could be plagiarized, leaving no room for latecomers. Between journalist and detective, Klein chose detective. The reason was simple: guard against fire, theft, and journalists. "No problem, Mr. Zhou Mingrui," Eve said, grinning as she leaned on the stair railing. "Perhaps you'll also need a professional assistant. You solve cases, and I'll report on them. You gain fame, and I get material. It's a win-win." "No," Klein said, pushing his hand forward with a serious expression. "It's Mr. Sherlock Moriarty." "Moriarty? Detective Moriarty?" Eve was momentarily stunned, then a smile curved her lips. "You truly are a genius at naming. If you had arrived 100 years earlier, Rosal wouldn't have had to rack his brains over Bernadette's name." "Bernadette? Emperor Rosal's daughter?" Eve nodded. "That name is very common in Intis." Klein had never been to Intis and didn't know much about it, but he knew that the name Bernadette was very common in Intis, which showed how common it was. Emperor Rosal's naming ability was indeed concerning. Chapter 164, Real-Life Cinderella. Miss Eve waved her hand casually, and before Klein could respond, she said directly, "Mr. Sherlock Moriarty certainly cannot live in our home. You need a new residence. Do you have an apartment in mind?" "Mrs. Summer is looking for tenants," Klein replied without hesitation. He always prepared and had backup plans for his actions. "Mrs. Summer." Eve stroked her chin, contemplating. "That's not bad. This way, I can even be neighbors with the great detective." Eve moved her hand upwards, covering her upturned lips, and said with a hint of playfulness in her tone, "Perhaps you'll meet a girl you like." Mrs. Summer always liked to host various parties at home. This was a middle-class custom. Mrs. Summer was very willing to use this method to publicize her quality of life. Many of these parties were essentially matchmaking events, and Eve had participated in quite a few. Klein was momentarily stunned. The topic had shifted too abruptly, but he immediately reacted and retorted, "No, I'm going home. If I can't bring that girl back, then I would be letting her down." Eve lowered her hand, Klein's reflection in her sea-blue eyes. She waved her right hand twice in front of him and said, "It was just a joke, don't be so serious." She turned around, took 2 steps forward, and added, "I need to rush my manuscript, or I won't make it in time." With that, Eve lifted her skirt and ran up the stairs with a patter. Klein withdrew his gaze and sat on the sofa, beginning to design his appearance as Sherlock Moriarty. Eve quickly entered her room and sat down at her desk. The young woman picked up the dark blue fountain pen on the desk and wrote row after row of elegant characters on the paper, "The Whale of the Sky." The Environmental Protection Association angrily denounces factory smoke that is killing humans. Under the warm glow of the gas lamp, Eve wrote the entire news article fluently. Setting down her pen, she carefully checked it once, and only after confirming its accuracy did she place it in a file bag and go downstairs. Downstairs, Klein was sitting on the sofa, petting a cat and reading the newspaper. He wanted to use his divination abilities and past life experience to invest in some industries. Although the bounty for hunting pirates was substantial, it was property from an unknown source. Klein could not use it casually and could only use it for private Beander transactions. Let's go. Eve shook the file bag in her hand, making a rustling sound. Klein nodded, placed Ruarui, who was on his lap, onto the sofa, stood up, patted his clothes, and picked up a portrait from the coffee table in front of him, saying, "I've designed Sherlock Moriarty's appearance." Eve looked up. Sherlock Moriarty's appearance combined the features of Klein, Sherlock, and Moriarty. His deep gray eyes looked unusually alert, his cheeks were thin, and his facial features still showed traces of Klein. He still had that faint scholarly air but looked more astute. "That's really good," Eve affirmed sincerely. She reached out her right hand towards Klein's face, and with a swipe in front of him, Klein's features immediately transformed into those of Sherlock Moriarty in the portrait. Only his appearance changed. Klein lowered his head for a look, muttering to himself. Klein felt a little disappointed. He picked up his top hat and cane and followed Eve out the door. The Backland Daily newspaper office was not in Sherwood Borough. Eve led Klein on foot all the way to Backland subway station. It was Klein's first time at a subway station in this world. Although he was surprised that this world actually had a subway, for someone who had seen the world, there was nothing particularly shocking about this subway station. Melissa would definitely like this, Klein thought. Eve walked up to the ticket seller, handed over 6 pence, and pointed at Klein, saying, "Get this gentleman a first-class ticket. I have an annual pass." "All right, miss," the ticket seller said with a bright smile, skillfully tearing off a ticket, stamping it, and handing it to Eve. Eve took the ticket, stepped forward 2 paces, and shoved it into Klein's hand, saying, "Once your identity document is processed, you can come here to get an annual pass. It's cheaper than a carriage for the same distance. I've already gotten one for Klein Moretti." Klein took the ticket and examined it in his hand. It was just stamped, without even a name. If someone else picked it up, they could use it. This world's subway has only existed for 25 years. I shouldn't expect too much from it. Klein thought silently to himself. First-class seats were individual, and the environment was cleaner than other carriages. Klein followed Eve to the platform and waited at the corresponding first-class position. Amidst the grinding of metal, a massive metal beast roared forth. This world's subway was still a steam train, emitting bursts of whistle sounds as it moved. Only after the passengers got off the train did Eve and Klein board one by one and sit in their respective seats. The subway was very fast. In no time, Klein and Eve had already reached their destination, with only a short walk remaining. Upon arriving at the newspaper office, Eve pointed to a shrewd-looking middle-aged woman and said, "Go find Miss Mila. You can go straight back after you're done, you don't need to wait for me." Klein nodded, adjusted his cane, and walked towards the woman. Eve turned to submit her manuscript for review at the newspaper office. The publication of a news article often required multiple reviews. When things were finished, Eve was about to open the door to leave when it was opened from the outside. "Hi, long time no see, Miss Eve." The blonde man outside the door immediately brightened upon seeing Eve, stood up straight, and said with obvious pleasure in his tone, "You are still as beautiful today." "Thank you very much, Mr. Melisse," Eve said, lifting her skirt and curtsying slightly. "You are also as handsome today. This is a pleasant surprise. Why is Miss Eve at the newspaper office?" Melisse immediately pressed. "Mr. Melisse, have you forgotten? Today is my deadline for submitting the manuscript," Eve explained. "Ah, then, Miss Eve's next news, do you have any ideas?" Melisse said, suddenly a bit embarrassed. Barely so." Eve's face showed a hint of difficulty. "It's just that." "Just that?" Melisse asked curiously. As a reporter, he was always sensitive to news. Eve looked left and right, moved 2 steps forward, squeezed out the door, reached out and closed the door, and gestured for Melisse to follow. Melisse immediately understood. A few minutes after Eve left, he also followed in the direction she had gone. The two arrived at a secluded spot. After confirming that no one was nearby, Eve mysteriously approached Melisse, lowered her voice, and said, "It's just that this matter involves the royal family." Eve did not continue, and Melisse already understood what she meant. The royal family of the Loan Kingdom still held significant power and influence in the press. If news unfavorable to the royal family were reported, even everyone who reviewed the news would be forced to resign. Politics? Melisse asked tentatively. Eve shook her head and said, "It's Cinderella." Cinderella. Melisse was stunned for a moment, then recalled this famous fairy tale by Emperor Rosal, and immediately understood Eve's meaning. A commoner girl, Eve added. A prince falling in love with a commoner girl was indeed a scandal for the royal family, but a real-life Cinderella would definitely be huge news, and it perfectly suited public taste. Melisse was unwilling to give up just like that. Which prince? It should be Prince Edsac. I didn't get a clear look at his face at the time, but his carriage was indeed a royal family carriage. Prince Edsac. Melisse's eyes darted around, and he had some thoughts in his mind. It's indeed very difficult. Although it doesn't involve politics, such a royal family scandal faces considerable pressure, Melisse said, a flicker of thought in his eyes. Have you decided? Not yet. Eve shook her head, her face full of hesitation. Think about it some more. If you decide, you can tell me, and I can offer you some help, Melisse said with a serious expression, but you must know, if this matter is reported, you might face the wrath of the royal family. Although others see being a reporter as a respectable and easy job, only we know how much effort it takes to stay in this industry. Just one wrong word, and we could lose our jobs, especially when dealing with nobles, tycoons, and officials, let alone the royal family. Moreover, reporters need young, strong bodies to be at the forefront of news. But, Miss Eve, although you still look so beautiful, you have to admit that you've been a reporter for over a decade. You're getting old. If you don't want to leave the reporting industry prematurely, it's better not to get involved in this matter. Eve's face showed a thoughtful expression, with a look of agreement in her shifting gaze. You make a good point. I will consider it carefully. I believe you will make the right choice, Miss Eve, Melisse said, taking off his top hat and bidding Eve farewell. Chapter 165, The Pamphlet. After settling on the price, Klein left the newspaper office directly. Having paid the advertising fee, Klein's weekly salary for this week was essentially gone. Fortunately, he would receive the bounty tonight. Klein sighed inwardly. Otherwise, he would have to rely on his old sister for relief. Klein clutched his cane tightly, his heart aching, and walked towards the subway station. People flowed through the street, and Klein suddenly felt a sense of being scrutinized. Although it was only for an instant, Klein was sure he hadn't misfelt it. He casually raised his head, subtly searching for the observer. A small blonde girl, dressed in noticeably ill-fitting clothes, stood by the roadside. She was very thin and seemed to be only 8 or 9 years old. Her overly large clothes covered half of her face, and a pair of blue eyes quietly observed the pedestrians on the road. Although very young, the girl's movements were very subtle. She didn't look like a novice. Klein frowned slightly, then quickly adjusted his expression, casually glanced over, discreetly noted the girl's facial features, and was about to leave to find an opportunity to follow her, but unexpectedly, the girl actively walked up to Klein. Sir. The girl looked left and right mysteriously, and her hand, hidden in her coat, quietly extended, revealing a small pamphlet. Sir, would you like to buy a periodical? Periodical. Klein's gaze shifted downwards, landing on the periodical. The cover featured a shy young girl in a goose-yellow dress, much like the covers of romance novels Klein had seen in his previous life. Does a periodical need such caution? Klein wondered, and tentatively asked, how much is it? Only 5 pence. The girl extended her other hand from her coat, showing 5 fingers. The price is acceptable. Klein hesitated for 2 seconds, finally buying the periodical. I'll buy it anyway, to see what's inside. Klein took the periodical from the girl's hand and was about to flip through it when the little girl immediately stopped him. No, sir, you can only read it at home, the girl said hurriedly. Why? Klein asked, feigning confusion. Is there something illegal inside? Yes, the little girl pulled at her clothes, bringing her collar up to her nose, and whispered, "You have to read it at home." Klein was stunned, not expecting the girl to admit it directly. He stared blankly at the cover of the periodical. The shy beauty's eyes were full of affection, as if she was gazing deeply at her lover. Could it be? Klein suddenly felt the periodical in his hand was a bit hot. He asked uncomfortably, "Who told you all this?" "My brother." What kind of brother would teach his younger sister these things? She's only 8 or 9, and he's letting his sister sell smut. They are also a pair of pitiful siblings. Klein, with a pang in his heart, took out 3 pence and handed it to the girl. "This is a tip." "Thank you, you are truly a benevolent sir." The girl looked exceptionally happy, taking the tip with one hand and thanking Klein. She ran back to the roadside with a somewhat awkward posture, looking for her next buyer. Klein guessed that the girl probably had several more periodicals under her coat, which was why she ran with such an awkward posture. He looked down at the periodical in his hand, and his face immediately flushed. He nervously looked left and right, rolled up the pamphlet, and put it into his coat pocket. Fortunately, the booklet was small enough to fit in his pocket. Klein thought with relief, one hand reaching into his pocket to hold the booklet to prevent any accidents. If an accident happened, the identity of Sherlock Moriarty could no longer be used. Walking down the street with smut hidden on him, what a strange experience. Klein thought, extremely embarrassed, praying that no accidents would occur, that he wouldn't be discovered. Perhaps the gods heard Klein's prayer. After a journey filled with trepidation, Klein successfully returned home. Because he couldn't enter the house through the main door as Sherlock Moriarty, Klein chose to climb through the window. The nimble body of a magician allowed him to easily enter the house. The moment his feet touched the ground, Klein's heart was still tense. He carefully circled the house once, and only after confirming that Rui was not there did he finally relax. But he still didn't take out the pamphlet. Instead, he quickly went upstairs, locked himself in his room, and then, with a sigh of relief, took out the pamphlet. Cough. I'll just study it a bit. With a secret anticipation, Klein opened the cover. The content of the first page was not, as Klein had imagined, a man and woman intimately together, but a black and white photograph. In the photo, a line of southern continent people fled in panic, while another line of people behind them shot at them with long guns. From their clothes, these people were just ordinary civilians, the youngest among them being an infant in swaddling clothes. As for the soldiers shooting the civilians, Klein didn't know which country they belonged to, but their distinctly Loan appearance had already told Klein the answer. Klein was stunned for a moment, then a wave of bitterness rose in his heart. This was indeed illegal content. The Loan kingdom imposed strict controls on newspapers. News from the colonies was rare in Loan newspapers, and if there was any, it was reports of Loan building railways and schools for the colonists, or reports of colonies attacking Loan and other colonies, beautifying colonization and demonizing the resistance army's actions. Klein immediately flipped through a few pages and found that they were all about Loan's atrocities in the colonies, and he immediately understood. This is indeed a good method, he sighed inwardly. This content could not appear in newspapers through official channels, it could only be sold privately. If buyers were directly told that the book's content was about Loan's atrocities in the colonies, many would probably scoff at it and refuse to believe it. But like this, tricking them into opening the book, as long as they saw the photo on the first page, even if they still didn't want to believe it, they would continue to read. Klein gently stroked the book's cover, took a deep breath, and opened the book again, reading it carefully, becoming more and more alarmed as he read. Every photo was terrifying, and the words after the photos were even more heartbreaking, and among those involved in the massacre were their original comrades. Loan, through ethnic policies, favored some ethnic groups, suppressed others, forbade intermarriage between ethnic groups, forbade ethnic groups from studying in the same schools, and even separated ethnic groups during conscription, dispatching armies of other ethnic groups to suppress resisting ethnic groups, thereby instigating ethnic conflicts and reducing the cost of colonization. Klein slowly closed the book, holding it weakly in his hand, his eyes already moist, his heart filled with bitterness and anger. No child of China would not feel sad about this. After a long while, Klein managed to calm himself down, placed the book under his pillow, stood up, and hurriedly jumped out of the window. That girl must be an intelligence agent for the Colonial Resistance Army in Loan. He had to find her. Klein rushed back to where he bought the book, only to find that the girl was no longer there. She must have left after I did. Klein guessed inwardly. After all, one must be cautious when doing such things. You're still here, didn't I say you didn't have to wait for me? A soft, beautiful female voice suddenly rang out from behind, so familiar that Klein immediately knew the identity of the person behind him. He turned his head. A beautiful young woman in a light blue dress was slowly walking towards him. Klein glanced at the pedestrians on the street, gripped his cane tightly, and said to Eve with a serious expression, "I have some matters, let's talk about them after we get home." Seeing Klein's serious expression, Eve tilted her head slightly, appearing somewhat puzzled, but she only nodded and said, "Then let's go back." Eve took 2 steps forward, walked beside Klein, and walked alongside him, silent all the way. The mechanical contraptions whizzed by, and as the scenery outside the window constantly receded, the two gradually approached the direction of home. The sound of wheels rubbing against the tracks gradually diminished, the subway began to slow down, and finally came to a standstill in the subway station. Eve and Klein got off one after another, cancelled the illusion on Klein, and returned home. Klein immediately ran upstairs, rushed into the bedroom, and came out of the bedroom a few seconds later. Eve stood at the bottom of the stairs, her gaze sweeping over the booklet in Klein's hand, a hint of understanding flashing in her eyes. Klein held the booklet up to Eve's eyes and asked, "Do you know this booklet?" "Of course," Eve nodded and said, "I was quite surprised when I first learned about it too. It seems this promotional strategy is very successful." Klein felt a bit awkward. He immediately wanted to explain, but then he realized that Eve was merely giving an objective evaluation, neither her tone nor her expression contained any hint of teasing. Explaining would only make him appear guilty. He hesitated for 2 seconds, then slowly closed his mouth again. "I didn't expect you to get it within 2 days of arriving in Backland, your luck is really good." Eve took the booklet from Klein's hand, opened it, and her gaze slowly swept across the pages. "This method of promotion is very slow, and the risks are high, but there's no other way. After many years of effort, it has also achieved considerable results. Are there no other methods?" Klein frowned and asked, troubled. This method was indeed inefficient and high risk. Previously, people from the southern continent ran newspapers in the northern continent. Eve looked up at Klein, slowly closed the book, and said, "As a result, the founder of the newspaper was forced to commit suicide, and the newspaper was taken over by the authorities." Klein fell silent. Eve retracted her gaze, held the booklet up to Klein's eyes, and pressed a corner of the book against his forehead with slight force, leaving a red mark on Klein's forehead. The sudden pressure on his forehead brought Klein back to his senses. He looked down at Eve with a bewildered expression. "If you don't report them, they will find you again." Eve tapped the cover of the book with her finger and said gently, "Perhaps in a month or 2, or maybe even longer." Klein's breath hitched, feeling as if the air was squeezing his chest, pressing on his heart. He shifted his gaze upwards, staring blankly at the book. On the cover, the shy young woman in a goose-yellow dress seemed to be looking at him, her eyes bright, her rosy cheeks making her appear even more youthful and radiant. In a trance, Klein seemed to see those black and white photographs, those children with vacant eyes in their parents' arms. If there were no war and poverty, they should also look like this. He stiffly raised both hands, placed them on Eve's hands, and, under her gaze, moved them down, grasped the book, and took it from the young woman's hands. "Put it away," Eve chuckled and said, "it would be troublesome if others saw it." Klein pressed his lips together, nodded, and silently returned to the bedroom. Eve watched Klein go upstairs until the door gently closed, completely blocking Klein's figure, before retracting her gaze. She reached out and grasped the stair railing, leaning forward against the banister, her head bowed, her sea blue eyes idly watching the steps. When Klein left the bedroom, he saw Eve hanging on the stair railing, but at this moment, he didn't want to pay attention to that. He had some questions he wanted to ask Eve. But before he could speak, the young woman straightened up and said with a smile, "Are we going to Rhodes Islands now?" No. It was already evening outside, earlier than the usual time Klein and Eve went. Klein firmly rejected the suggestion, he needed to get answers first. "I have questions I want to ask you." Klein looked at Eve with piercing eyes, his expression serious, and quickly walked downstairs to stand in front of her. "Speak." Eve made a "please" gesture, indicating for Klein to begin. Klein took a deep breath, calmed himself, his expression and tone both exceptionally serious and tense. "This world has Beyonder powers, so have the supreme existences of Beyonder powers become involved. Actually, you know it in your heart, don't you?" Eve curved her lips, pointed her finger at Klein's chest, and said in a deep voice, "The gods certainly don't oppose this matter, and for humans, the gods not opposing it means tacit approval. Then you and the goddess." Klein still remembered that Eve and the goddess had a good relationship. "The Evernight doesn't care," Eve replied. "She doesn't care about Lowen's actions, nor does she care about the southern continent's actions. If she had a considerable number of believers in the southern continent, perhaps she would care, but the reality is she doesn't. Although Lowen has always been committed to spreading the faith of Evernight and Storm to the southern continent, the people of the southern continent have always rejected foreign religions." "Doesn't care." Klein lowered his eyes, his heart filled with mixed emotions. Although it wasn't the answer he wanted, it wasn't the worst either. "It's extremely foolish to demand divine morality from a human perspective." Eve retracted her hand, gently smoothing out the wrinkles she had poked into Klein's chest, and said, "Then you." "Me." Eve smiled and said, "I am full of humanity." Klein was silent for a moment, then asked, "Does humanity get diminished after becoming a god?" "Yes." "Then will you become a god?" Klein asked cautiously, his tone laced with tension and worry. Eve looked up at Klein's brown eyes with her usual expression, and asked with a smile, "Do you not wish for me to become a god?" Klein's gaze lowered, focusing on Eve's deep sea blue eyes. Her expression was the same as always, gentle and beautiful, making it impossible for Klein to discern her true thoughts. "Do you want to become a god?" Klein's lips moved a few times. Not knowing how to answer, he could only throw the question back. "I didn't want to before." Eve retracted her hand and took a step back, saying, "And now?" "Now." Klein kept his gaze on Eve, wanting to capture her every expression, but she merely smiled faintly, no different from her usual self. "I do," she replied. Whether from Eve's perspective or the gods' perspective, her becoming a god would be more beneficial. And for the southern continent, she not only had to become a god but also an outer deity. Outer deity. She thought of Michael and Medici. The primordial one's consciousness in the fifth epoch was already very weak, making it much safer to become an outer deity than in the third epoch. As for Medici, that fellow had always aimed to be an outer deity. Because she didn't have much ambition, the precedent of Michael, and didn't want to turn against Medici, hadn't had the idea of becoming an outer deity. But now, if Medici were still alive, then she would have to become a demoness, or even a dual pathway true god before reuniting with Medici. Eve silently sighed in her heart, then looked up at Klein. "Do you want to become a god?" A complex emotion flashed in Eve's eyes as she asked in return. Klein was stunned for a moment, then pointed at himself blankly, "Me." Eve nodded, "Is there anyone else here?" I'm only sequence 7. Klein was a bit speechless. It would be good enough if he could become an angel, a true god was simply out of reach. "So, do you want to?" Eve continued to press. "No." Klein paused, thought seriously for 2 seconds, and replied without hesitation, "I'd be satisfied to become an angel, having powerful strength and a long lifespan while also maintaining my humanity. If possible, I hope to become a king of angels like you, who is also very powerful among angels." Eve looked deeply at Klein, her eyes holding a complexity that Klein couldn't understand. She chuckled softly. This time, Klein caught the emotions contained in Eve's tone: relief, bitterness, regret. It was very complex, making Klein wonder if he had made a mistake. Remember your answer now. Eve suddenly moved closer to Klein, her gaze fixed intently on Klein's eyes. Klein subconsciously took a step back, staring blankly at Eve, but in an instant, he understood that he must have entered into a divine scheme and was an important existence within it. The moment the sole of his shoe touched the ground, Klein immediately retracted his foot, straightened up, and solemnly promised, "I will." Eve curled her lips, saying nothing. She placed her hand on Klein's shoulder, and in an instant, the world's colors became richer, like an oil painting. "Let's go." Before Klein could react, he felt a sudden rush of intense color as Eve pulled him into the spirit world. Clearly, Eve intended to stop the current conversation. Klein's gaze lingered on Eve for a few seconds as he quietly allowed her to hold his shoulder and traverse the spirit world. In a flash, the two appeared at the same spot where they had parted ways with the black-haired lady yesterday. In the quiet of the night, the remote, desolate area felt somewhat eerie, with the crimson moonlight flowing through the darkness as the only source of light. The charming black-haired lady was still wearing the same thin dress from yesterday, with only an old jacket added, standing nervously in the open space, occasionally glancing left and right. "Mr. Miss." The black-haired lady noticed Eve and Klein, and a fawning smile immediately appeared on her face as she hurried towards them. The lady took out the envelope hidden in her jacket and reluctantly handed it to Klein. The envelope, bulging with banknotes, was her first time seeing so much money, and she couldn't help but squeeze it whenever she had it tucked away. As she hid the envelope filled with gold pounds in her bosom, she repeatedly wanted to run away with the money, but each time she barely managed to suppress her desire. The black-haired lady adjusted her jacket. The thin coat couldn't shield her from the cold night wind, but she just wanted to appear presentable in front of them. The lady looked up and saw Klein take £10 from the envelope and hand it to her. She hesitated for a couple of seconds, extending and retracting her hand several times, indecisive. Klein frowned slightly. Seeing Klein's frown, the black-haired lady's heart skipped a beat. She immediately lowered her head, not daring to look directly at Klein, and tremblingly reached out to take the £10. "Are you in trouble?" Klein suddenly asked. The black-haired lady's movement froze, her hand suspended in midair. After she reacted, she didn't know whether to retract her hand or continue to take the payment. Either option made her feel exceptionally awkward, so she could only remain in the stunned, outstretched posture. Eve's gaze swept over the lady. She took 2 steps forward, directly took the £10 banknote from Klein's hand, and placed it into the black-haired lady's hand. She loosely half-hugged the black-haired lady and softly comforted her. "Don't worry, if you have any difficulties, you can tell us." Eve's current appearance was gentle and non-aggressive, making it easier to gain others' trust. The black-haired lady's lips were tightly pressed inward. She clutched the green banknote in both hands, stammered, and lowered her head, her eyes fixed on the £10. Her fingers continuously smoothed over the creases on the banknote, as if trying to make it new. Her feet unconsciously drew closer, her toes pressed together. I want to borrow £5, the lady stammered, seemingly feeling that the request was too much, or perhaps worried that they wouldn't lend it to her. The lady immediately added, "I will pay it back, principal and interest. I will definitely clear the debt within a year, no, within half a year. Please, kind Mr. and Miss." The black-haired lady's eyes were full of pleading, and her tone was sincere and earnest. £5, added to the £10, made £15, which was a considerable sum. After all, when Klein first arrived in this world, all of the Moretti family's savings combined were less than £1. "You can, but you must tell us why you need these £5, Klein said. I need identification." The black-haired lady lowered her eyes, hesitating before speaking. Identification, Klein frowned, roughly guessing the black-haired lady's situation. Normally, obtaining identification wouldn't cost so much. The black-haired lady likely wanted to hide her identity and was seeking unofficial channels. "If it's just identification, we can help you with it," and you won't need to pay any fees, Klein said after a few seconds of thought, looking up at the black-haired lady with a serious expression. As your employers, I believe we have the right to know your basic information. Klein needed to be responsible for his actions. He wanted to know the black-haired lady's true circumstances to avoid good intentions leading to bad outcomes. Of course, thank you very much, kind Mr. and Miss. The black-haired lady immediately replied, exceptionally grateful for Klein and Eve's help. You don't have to call me Mr. My name is German Sparrow, Klein corrected her. He had long been dissatisfied with this address. The black-haired lady calling him Mr. and Eve, Miss, always made Klein feel strange, as if they had become father and daughter. You can call me Morella, Eve said, stepping back half a pace and retracting her arm from around the lady, smiling. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Sparrow, Miss Morella. The black-haired lady straightened up, pulling at her jacket with both hands, and said in a low voice, my name is Lysandra, but I don't remember my surname. After speaking, Lysandra slightly raised her eyes to look at the two in front of her. Noticing their frowns, she lowered her head again, bitterly explaining in her heart, I was abducted by a man when I was very young. That man made me call him father, impersonating my adoptive father, and finally sold me too. Her voice carried a hint of a sob, and she didn't continue. She absently touched her neck, her fair hand gradually sliding down, finally just clutching her jacket tightly. Eve and Klein watched her in silence. Although she hadn't finished, they both guessed what the girl had been through. I don't know when I was sold there. I was very young then, and I couldn't remember my age to begin with. After he abducted me, I remembered my age even less. But I still remember the woman who bought me at the time disliked that I was too young, but in the end, she still bought me. I've also forgotten my surname, and I suspect this name isn't my original name, but who knows. After she bought me, I was forced to take some drugs, and after taking those drugs, my body started to develop. Lysandra pressed her lips tightly together, trying not to let out a cry. She didn't want to vent negative emotions to her benefactors, but she couldn't help it. These things she didn't want to mention, she thought she would never be able to say them, but now she found that it was like a flood, tightly blocked by a dam, but once a breach appeared, the flood would rush out. The grievances and resentment in her heart almost made her lose her mind. Then I escaped from there, Lysandra said quickly, sniffing. She didn't want to continue burdening her benefactors with these negative emotions. Because I had no identification, I couldn't leave here or find a job. Later, I found someone who could process fake identification. He said he could help me with identification for just £8, but I didn't have that much money and no job, so I could only be a streetwalker. Later, I saved up £8 and went to him. He took my money but didn't help me process the identification. He told me it would cost another £15. £8 was just the fee for processing the identification, and during the process of obtaining identification, many connections had to be made, requiring additional fees. £15 was just the minimum fee. Eve took 2 steps forward, once again embracing Lysandra, gently stroking the girl's back, and comforting her. Klein symbolically flicked a gold coin, verifying the truth of the woman's words. After confirming that Lysandra's words were all true, he said, I understand. We will process your identification for you. Same place, same time tomorrow night. Chapter 168, A Letter. Thank you so much. Lysandra covered her mouth, sobbing out her thanks. Storms above, you are truly the kindest sir and miss in the world. A follower of the Lord of Storms, Eve thought silently to herself. How much do you remember about your parents? Eve asked. Perhaps we can help you find them. Lysandra pressed her lips together, shook her head slightly, and whispered, I only remember living in a large manor when I was little, and there was a church near the manor. That description is too broad. Klein frowned and asked, anything else? German's appearance leaned towards coldness, and when he questioned with a serious expression, it always gave people a sense of being interrogated. Nothing else, Lysandra said softly, a hint of apology in her tone. I'm sorry. There's nothing to apologize for. Eve waved her hand, reached out to stroke the girl's cheek, and said with a smile, we'll keep an eye out for you. Now, go back and rest, good child. Okay. Lyssandra's movements stiffened. She cautiously took 2 steps back, her eyes darting away, not daring to look at Eve. See you tomorrow, Eve waved, bidding Lysandra farewell. After watching Lysandra leave, Klein turned to Eve and said, you should know where her parents are, right? Yes, Eve nodded and said, in West Bayan. West Bayan. Klein felt a headache coming on. He had originally thought that sending her to where her parents were would be enough, considering it an act of extreme benevolence, but if it was West Bayan, he would need to reconsider. West Bayan was constantly in chaos, not only with the wars between Intis and Loan but also with the conflicts among the many local tribes. Let her choose, Eve said with a smile. After all, it was her matter, and if there were significant risks involved, whether to take on those risks should be her own decision. Klein nodded. He had indeed had the same thought. Eve placed a hand on Klein's shoulder and instantly brought him back to their house in Backland. The living room was in darkness, even the faint moonlight was firmly blocked by the dark curtains outside, and a pair of brown eyes floated in midair, quietly watching them. Holy crap! The moment he saw the eyes, Klein's heart skipped a beat, thinking that some strange spirit had entered the house. Eve noticed Klein's abnormality. She had noticed those eyes immediately. Good night, Zhou Mingrui. Eve patted Klein's shoulder, chuckled, and turned to carry the black cat, Miss Ruarui, who was lying on the table, up the stairs. The demoness pathway began to enhance night vision at sequence 9. Although Ruarui perfectly blended with the night, it was still far from enough to evade the night vision capabilities of a king of angels. Meow. As Miss Ruarui passed Klein, she let out a soft meow, looking at him with disdain. Good night. Klein looked at Ruarui's eyes, still unable to separate her from the thick darkness. Ruarui wasn't wearing a collar, and her pitch-black fur was practically a natural invisibility cloak. I actually saw disdain in a cat's eyes. No, that's not right. I can't treat Ruarui like an ordinary cat. She's very smart, probably smarter than Leonard. Klein watched Eve go upstairs and enter her room, and finally felt that it was a wise decision for Eve to put a collar on Ruarui. Eve carried Ruarui back to the room and placed her on the bed. Ruarui shook her body, nudged the blanket with her head, and quickly burrowed underneath. Good night, meow. The next day, Klein still woke up earlier than Eve. After slowly eating breakfast, he went to work, specifically checking the mailbox before leaving. 2 hours after Klein left, Eve also woke up. She walked straight to the mailbox, took out the newspaper she had subscribed to, turned, and went to the dining table to eat while reading. Suddenly, Eve had a flash of inspiration, looked up at her room upstairs, and after a casual glance, continued to enjoy her breakfast. After finishing breakfast, Eve wiped her hands, then stood up and returned to the room. The first thing she saw upon opening the door was an envelope lying quietly on the desk. Eve took 2 steps forward, picked up the envelope, tapped Ruarui twice on the head, and said, "Your letter." Ruarui reluctantly raised her head, licked her paw with her eyes closed, and said, "Open it." "You're so relaxed, Miss Ruarui," Eve said with a smile, yet she still picked up a small knife, opened the envelope, and placed it in front of Ruarui. "Dear Ms. Ruarui. Hello. Thank you again for your help. Hugh and I are both doing well. I've recently heard some interesting rumors about the Abraham family from the 4th epoch. I thought you might be interested in these." Ruarui continued to read. The rest was just everyday matters. A letter from Fur's wall. She must be asking about the Abraham family, Ruarui said with a hint of disdain in her tone. It's truly clumsy. Eve raised an eyebrow, with a bit of a playful mood, and said with a smile, "Do you want to reply?" "Reply?" Ruarui's cat paw slapped the letter paper. "You write it for me." Eve turned, pulled out a blank piece of paper, and sat properly on the wooden chair, looking like a diligent student. "Dear Miss Fur's wall," Ruarui continued to lie on the bed without moving, and said, "Although you tried your best, I still want to say that your disguise is truly clumsy." "Wow, No mercy at all, Eve said, but wrote it down on the letter paper word for word. Ruorui rolled her eyes and continued, if you want to know about the Abraham family or even want to find the Abraham family, write me another letter asking, and I will answer you. Also, this letter was written for me by my master. Perhaps the handwriting this time will satisfy you. Done. Eve stuffed the letter into the envelope, held it between two fingers, twisted her wrist, and flicked it towards the mirror on the table. The envelope immediately shot towards the mirror surface like a blade. Swish! The mirror surface rippled like a stone dropped into water, swallowing the snow-white envelope. On the other side, Furs sat nervously by the cabinet, her eyes fixed on the cabinet door. Suddenly, Furs had a flash of inspiration and quickly opened the cabinet door, seeing the envelope next to the mirror. Envelope. Furs remembered the letter Ruorui had sent last time, feeling a bit confused. Could it be that she just happened to encounter Ruorui's master? Furs's heart skipped a beat, a bad premonition rising, but she still laughed it off to comfort herself. It shouldn't be such a coincidence, right? Even if I really did encounter her, would that high-level existence write a letter for a mere sequence 9 like me? Impossible. With a strange feeling, Furs reached out for the mirror and the envelope. The envelope wasn't sealed with wax, so Furs didn't need to find a knife, she simply opened it and pulled out the letter. As soon as her eyes touched the handwriting, Furs felt her mind go blank. This beautiful handwriting was definitely not Miss Ruorui's. In an instant, Furs's thoughts were like summer mosquitoes, buzzing annoyingly and flying chaotically everywhere. One moment, she thought she might be able to latch onto a powerful figure, directly finding the Abraham family to solve her full moon muttering problem. The next, she feared she might be dragged into a high-sequence battle and discarded as an insignificant pawn. The author's imagination became unprecedentedly active at that moment. Furs felt that if her imagination could maintain its current level, she could complete her new work within a month, as long as she didn't procrastinate. But this was impossible. Neither maintaining her current high-level imagination nor not procrastinating was possible. Furs took several deep breaths internally, trying to calm herself, and nervously shifted her gaze to the paper. Though you tried your best, I still want to say your disguise is truly clumsy. If you wish to know about the Abraham family, or even find the Abraham family, rewrite a letter and ask me. I will answer you. Seeing this, Furs felt a pang of regret for trying to extract information from a high-sequence powerhouse. Although the other party was just a cat, it was still a high-sequence powerhouse. Her little schemes were seen through at a glance. Also, this letter was written by my master. Perhaps this time the handwriting will satisfy you. Indeed. No, wait, how did Miss Ruorui know I thought her handwriting was ugly? I never said anything. Although puzzled, Furs didn't dwell on the issue. The most important thing now was to reply to Miss Ruorui and apologize to her. Thinking this, Furs displayed rare initiative, immediately rushing back to her room to start writing the letter at her desk. Minsk Street, Sherwood Borough, Backland. Eve stood up after sending the letter, habitually stretched, and asked, "Do you want to come out with me?" No, Miss Ruorui lay on the bed without moving. I'm going back to sleep, and she should reply soon. So lazy, Eve tutted twice, feigning disgust. Miss Ruorui was already used to mutually disliking Eve. She didn't even open her eyes and simply said, "Can't compare to you." Eve didn't mind. She picked up the dark gray women's bowler hat from the coat rack, casually put it on her head, making her already messy hair even more disheveled, with a few strands hanging on the brim. But the messy hairstyle didn't detract from her beauty, it even added a touch of wild charm. After casually running her fingers through her hair a few times, Eve picked up her handbag and left, taking a public carriage to the Backland Journalist Club. The Backland Journalist Club, as its name suggests, was a club established for journalists. Here, journalists learned skills such as writing and photography, and could also exchange information. However, few journalists would disclose news information to other journalists. It was generally for exchanging experiences and expanding networks. Many journalists in Backland joined this club, in addition to some photography enthusiasts and those aspiring to become journalists. Hi, Miss Eve, it's a pleasant surprise to see you at the club. As soon as Eve entered, she heard the enthusiastic voice of the receptionist, Miss Ayla. Good morning, Miss Ayla. I don't think my frequency of appearing at the club is that low, is it? Eve replied with a smile. No, dear, even seeing you every day, it's still a pleasant surprise to see you. It has nothing to do with frequency. Ayla's face beamed with joy. She stood on her tiptoes, raising her heels, which made her instantly taller, allowing her to look Eve, who was wearing high heels, in the eye. I think anyone who has seen you would feel this way. No, it should be anyone who has noticed you. Miss Eve, with such beautiful looks, is always unable to attract others' attention, which is illogical, Ayla muttered, seemingly regretting this fact immensely. But this is very mystical. Eve thought silently, then said aloud, perhaps this is also a kind of luck. A luck I can't understand. Ayla cupped her face with both hands, saying wistfully, if I had half of Miss Eve's beauty, I would definitely wear my prettiest dress and walk all over Backland. Ayla had ordinary features and some freckles on her face, but her overall facial structure was harmonious, and her appearance was gentle, with a youthful exuberance. Though not stunning, she was very pleasant to look at. Then you'll need to prepare a very good pair of shoes, otherwise, your feet will have blisters after walking, Eve said with a smile. Yes, indeed. Ayla mused seriously, then suddenly, as if remembering something, her expression changed. She bent down and took a document bag from the counter, saying, oh dear, I almost forgot. This is something Mr. Melisse left for Miss Eve. Oh, thank you. Eve took the document bag and thanked her. It seems I need a private room, thank you. My pleasure. Ayla came out from behind the counter, jogged 2 steps to Eve, and led her to a private room. After bidding farewell to Ayla, Eve sat on the nearest sofa and opened the document bag. The document bag wasn't thick, and there wasn't much inside, just a few sheets of information. Eve pulled out the documents in order. The first document had a portrait of a gentle-featured lady. The lady was very beautiful, with a graceful appearance yet a special seductive quality. Even through the photo, one could feel her charm. Eve gazed at the girl in the photo, tapping twice on Tris' cheek. In the name column next to the picture, a hint of a smile in her eyes. Cheek's revival contingency. Cheek's condition hasn't improved, and this time she couldn't even keep an eye on her own revival contingency. Eve casually scanned the information. As she expected, the information about this lady named Tris was pitifully scarce. Of course it's scarce, after all, she used to be a man. Eve had no doubt about Tris's former gender. Didn't she know what Cheek was like? Dedicated to turning men into demonesses, and also hunting female demonesses. Besides the sequence conflict, Eve's identity as a female demoness also contributed significantly to Cheek's hostility towards her. Eve tucked Tris's information back into the file bag and pulled out the subsequent documents. The subsequent documents were handwritten copies of the correspondence between Melisse and Prince Edsac's butler and head maid. Truly worthy of the Backland Daily's best reporter, with enviable connections and initiative. Eve quickly scanned the contents of the correspondence, noting that both the butler and the head maid held complex feelings towards Tris. They were both happy that the prince had found someone he liked, yet also worried about their future, and even more concerned about Tris's attitude towards Prince Edsac. Regarding whether an interview and public announcement were possible, both unanimously stated that they needed to wait a while longer, as they would inquire with Prince Edsac and Miss Tris. As expected, Eve tucked the documents back, thinking to herself. The Theosophy Order was also searching for Tris, and they would certainly not remain indifferent once Tris's news was exposed. The mausoleum was about to be fully repaired, and the Lowen royal family and Cheek should begin their transaction after its completion. Eve needed to find Cheek after the Theosophy Order obtained the Beander characteristic and before Cheek consumed it. The sharp corner of the file bag tapped her palm repeatedly. A thoughtful expression flashed across Eve's eyes as she casually placed the file bag on the desk. Minsk Street, Sherwood Borough, Backland. Ruarui picked up the letter with her mouth and gently placed it on the desk. Perhaps believing the recipient was still Eve, Furs very formally placed the paper into an envelope, sealed it with sealing wax, and even affixed a stamp. Her attitude was very sincere, but it brought no small amount of trouble to Ruorui. After her black, furry cat paw slipped into the drawer handle, she pulled hard, opening the drawer. Her small head poked inside, and she picked up the letter opener with her mouth. Ruorui placed the letter opener on the desk, then held it sideways in her mouth. Her brown cat eyes intently watched the envelope's seal, while one paw held the envelope to prevent it from sliding. Slowly and carefully, she inserted the blade into the envelope's seal, and with a decisive stroke, the seal was cut open in an arc. Ruorui put the letter opener back into the drawer, extended her trimmed claws, and pried open the envelope. With a flick of her two paws, the envelope's opening faced downwards, and the letter dropped out. She continued to use her blunt claws to unfold the letter until the entire sheet lay flat before her. Dear Miss Ruorui. Hello. Please allow me to offer my sincerest apologies. I am deeply sorry for my rashness and ignorance. For some reasons, I need to find the Abraham family. As for the interesting rumors I mentioned, does Miss Ruorui know about the Abraham family's full moon muttering? The rumors I know are related to the Abraham family's full moon muttering, and my reason for seeking the Abraham family is also related to it. Finally, greetings to you and your great and respected master. Ruorui's pair of brown cat eyes gazed at the neat handwriting on the letter, falling into contemplation. She could probably guess some things. Furs Wall should be experiencing the full moon muttering herself or someone close to her was, and she wanted to find the Abraham family to resolve it. It was a pity, however, that her understanding of the Abraham family was limited, and she did not know that the Abraham family also had no solution. I wonder where she got this information, Ruorui mused silently, feeling it was necessary to investigate. She glanced at the letter, thinking about the content of her reply. After 2 seconds of thought, she suddenly let out a tisk. The more Ruorui thought about it, the more she felt she was losing out. The benefits a Sequence 9 could bring were inherently few, and she only asked these 2 Sequence 9s to do 3 things. Yet, before she even issued a task, the other party came to her seeking knowledge. This made Ruorui feel very much like a big pushover. What's wrong? A familiar voice suddenly came from outside the door. Ruorui looked back. The doorknob turned twice, and the door was then pushed open inwards. Eve's figure appeared in the room. You're back so soon? Ruorui turned her head, her gaze returning to the letter in front of her. Come help me write a letter. After submitting a news report, Eve would always spend a short time at the Backland Journalists Club, a habit of many reporters in Backland. Sometimes it's hard to tell who the master is, Eve complained casually, but her body was already seated at the desk, taking out a sheet of letter paper. Help me tell Furs that if she is looking for the Abraham family to resolve the full moon muttering, then she can give up, because the Abraham family also has no solution. Then, ask her about the source of her information regarding the Abraham family. Ah, I know that question, Eve said with a smile, poking her cheek with the cap of the fountain pen she held. The source of the information is related to me, oh. To be precise, the source of Furs's information's source is me. Ruorui paused, then asked with some exasperation, what are you trying to do now? She's just a Sequence 9. Is my image that bad in your heart? Eve's face showed a hint of grievance, but that grievance was exceptionally fake, visibly perfunctory, yet combined with her exceptionally beautiful face, it had a rather pitiful charm. Ruorui silently took 2 steps back. Her pitch-black, mouthless cat face displayed very obvious disdain. Eve put away her fake grievance, smiled slightly, and turned around. The golden nib of the fountain pen glided across the pristine white letter paper, leaving ink-colored script, with each stroke forming delicate characters. She lowered her head, her long black hair cascading like a waterfall, spreading across her chest and back, subtly revealing her fair neck. Furs Wall is currently only a Sequence 9, but if she can establish a connection with the Abraham family, we can consider bringing her into the Tarot Club, Eve said while writing the letter. Currently, there are too few people in the Tarot Club, only 5 in total. This number is completely insufficient for it to transition into an organization. Moreover, the current tarot club is more of a trading club, so the requirements for initial members differ significantly from those of an organization. Their sequence cannot be too high, and they need to have sufficient trading resources. If Furs can connect with the Abraham family, she can obtain enough trading resources, and, the Fool, can also use this to establish a connection with Abraham. Also, I have another conjecture. Eve continued writing the letter without raising her head. What conjecture? Ruarui asked, puzzled. Saphira Castle might be able to block Bethel's calls, Eve explained. We can use Furs as an experiment for that. Chapter 171, The Boy. So Furs is a guinea pig. Rui lowered her head and licked her paw, thinking silently to herself. For a moment, only the sound of a pen scratching across paper remained in the room, a crisp, tap, tap, continuously emanating from the metallic nib. Rui pushed off with her hind legs, jumping onto the desk and closer to Eve's hand, watching her write elegant characters. Dear Miss Furs, though I am willing to answer your queries, you should know that there is a price to pay. Please carefully consider the price you are willing to offer, and write to me again once you have decided. I will then come to meet you. Of course, if you wish to prepay with certain items, I am also amenable. Rui watched Eve draw the final punctuation mark, gently blew on it twice, and only after the ink was completely dry did she place it into an envelope and send it to Furs. If the experiment is successful, we can further research how to shelter the Abraham family without directly involving people, Eve said with a grin. Rui could tell she was genuinely excited. It's also a way to repay Bethel for the coordinates he gave me. Regarding the Abraham family left behind by Bethel, Eve has always been of the mindset to help whenever possible. North Backland. Klein walked leisurely along the road to the train station as usual. First, I'll go home. Old sister should be there now. After changing into the appearance of Sherlock Moriarty, I'll go to 15 Minsk Street to check. I left paper and a pen outside the door yesterday, I wonder if any commissions have come in. Klein pondered as he walked, his eyes level, paying attention to the road ahead. The stone road was clean and tidy. Klein's silver inlaid cane made a soft tapping sound with each step. On both sides of the road were various shops, red-roofed European-style buildings retaining a touch of rustic simplicity. Since it was after work hours, the number of pedestrians on the road far exceeded the usual. Klein, holding his cane, walked through the crowd step by step, his gaze sweeping over the shops on both sides of the road. Jack's Hat and Clothing Store, Backland Department Store, Anna's Cake Shop. Klein's peripheral vision caught Anna's Cake Shop on his left, and his steps paused for a second. He knew this cake shop, it was very close to where he worked, and he had seen his colleagues buy desserts from this shop. It was said that the owner of Anna's Cake Shop was once a pastry chef for a noble, exclusively serving the aristocracy. The truth of this matter was questionable, but it clearly gave Anna's Cake Shop an excellent reputation and made it very popular among the middle class. The prices of desserts at Anna's Cake Shop were inflated but indeed delicious, which made the middle-class gentlemen and ladies firmly believe in the owner's identity as a noble pastry chef. Klein's gaze lingered on the cake shop's display window for 2 seconds, then he turned and walked towards the cake shop. He had already received the bounty and was not short on money now. Although the bounty shouldn't be spent recklessly, using a small portion was acceptable. After all, no one knew how much savings he had taken when he left home, so Klein wasn't worried about being discovered. Ding-a-ling. The wind chimes on the door chimed clear and pleasant, signaling the arrival of a customer to the owner. Good afternoon, sir. The owner of Anna's Cake Shop was a kindly-looking old lady. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes became more pronounced with her smile, yet she appeared even more benevolent. Her white hair, with a few strands of light gold hidden within, was neatly coiled at the back of her head, giving her a clean appearance. A yellow rose hair ornament in her white hair added a touch of elegance. Is there anything you need? The old woman's smile was very kind, and her aged voice asked softly. Klein's eyes darted around, observing the interior decor. The cake shop was not large. 3 glass display counters were placed 3 steps from the shop's door, filled with numerous exquisite desserts. The bottom layer of the glass counters held ice to prevent the desserts from melting in the hot sun. On both the left and right sides near the shop's door, 2 small round tables were set. Beside the right-hand small round table sat a small boy with silver-white hair, enjoying an ice cream. Silver-white hair. The unusual hair color made Klein glance at the boy an extra time, but he quickly withdrew his gaze and looked at the display cabinet instead. Could you recommend some for me? Klein asked politely, his gaze on the exquisite pastries in the glass display counter. Of course, sir. Do you have any preferences? I'm open to anything. The old woman lightly tapped the counter with her finger and said with a smile, this is Queen's bread. You must have heard of it. It's very popular even among nobles and has always sold well. She then moved her finger to the cabinet on her left and said, ice cream is stored there. It's currently the best-selling item. After all, who can refuse ice cream on a hot summer day? After speaking, the old woman chuckled softly and looked at the small boy with silver-white hair, saying, I think my ice cream won't disappoint you. That little gentleman has already eaten 3. Though I feel honored, I'm quite worried if that little gentleman will have his pocket money confiscated by his mother when he gets home. Hearing this, Klein glanced at the boy again. 3. Won't he get a stomach ache? He thought silently to himself, then turned his head and said to the shop owner, 2 servings of ice cream. The shop owner was right. Refusing ice cream in summer was a very difficult task that required great willpower. Which one do you need, sir? The shop owner maintained her kind smile, taking out 2 ice cream containers from the cabinet behind her. Each one has a different flavor. Of course, you can try every one. 6 flavors in total, 3 scoops per serving, so I can try all 6. I'll try them all, Klein said. The shop owner nodded, picked up a spoon, and prepared to scoop 1 spoonful from each flavor of ice cream. Another serving of ice cream, please. Just as the shop owner's spoon reached into the cabinet, Klein heard a child's voice from behind him. The 4th one, will he really not get a stomach ache? Klein muttered in his heart, turning to look at the boy. The boy had already put down his spoon and placed the ice cream cup on the counter. Oh, my goodness, this is already the 4th one, little sir. Believe me, your mother will surely scold you. The shop owner took the cup but did not immediately give the boy more ice cream. It's fine, trust me. The boy said indifferently, then lowered his head and took a piece of paper from his overalls pocket, beginning to fold it. Klein saw the small square piece of paper transform into a beautiful paper crane under the boy's nimble hands. He thought of even his own inherited crafting abilities, and couldn't help but feel a bit of admiration for the boy. Even though Magician had increased his hand dexterity, Klein's crafting ability hadn't changed much. Chapter 172, Paper Crane. The boy picked up the paper crane, held it out to Klein, and asked, Uncle, do you want this? Uncle, do I look that old? Klein silently grumbled about the address in his heart, because Klein's body looked very much like a university student, and in fact, he was a fresh graduate. Have I already been tainted with the agedness of a corporate drone? He thought playfully, coming back to his senses and facing the little boy. He suspected that his continuous staring at the paper crane in the boy's hand might have caused a misunderstanding, so he shook his head, intending to explain. But before he could speak, the boy had already placed the paper crane on the glass counter and taken his ice cream. Klein paused for a moment, his gaze shifting down to the paper crane on the glass counter. Is this meant for me? Klein pondered for 2 seconds, then picked up the paper crane and politely said, Thank you. Sir, your ice cream will be 2 sour in total. At this moment, the shop owner had also packaged Klein's ice cream and placed it next to him. 1 portion for 1 sour, this price is indeed high. I hope their taste lives up to their price. Klein casually put the paper crane into his pocket, then pulled out 2 1 sour banknotes and handed them to the shop owner, thinking with a hint of hardtake. Such a price made Klein couldn't help but look at the boy again. Even if the boy spent all his pocket money on ice cream, he would still have at least 4 soer of pocket money. In comparison, the pocket money he gave Melissa seemed a bit too little. A hint of bitterness welled up in Klein's heart. He pursed his lips inward, silently picked up the ice cream from the counter, and returned all the way to Minsk Street. In the small courtyard, a narrow and short stone path led to the front door. Both sides of the path were lush and green. Although there were no flowers planted like in other yards, it was well maintained, simple, and beautiful. To the left of the stone path stood a mailbox. Klein took 2 steps forward, opened the mailbox, and as usual, there were no letters. He took out the newspapers from the mailbox. These were all subscribed to by Eve. She subscribed to many types of newspapers, and the delivery times also varied. Klein tucked the newspapers under his arm, took out a key from his right pocket to unlock the door, and entered the house. He looked around but didn't see Eve or Rui. He placed the ice cream and newspapers on the table, then turned around, and a pair of deep, sea blue eyes suddenly came into view. The sudden fright made Klein instinctively take a step back, accidentally bumping his lower back against the edge of the table, emitting a soft thud. Klein glanced back and saw the ice cream packaging bag shaking slightly. He immediately turned around and reached out to steady the bag that was about to fall. Phew! Klein breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He opened the packaging bag, confirmed that the ice cream was safe and sound, then turned around and asked somewhat displeased, "What are you doing?" Eve didn't speak, only scrutinized him from head to toe. She didn't conceal her probing gaze, and Klein could clearly feel the investigative look that seemed to penetrate him. That gaze slithered over him like a snake, making Klein unconsciously tense up, though he didn't know what was happening. What's wrong? Klein's question was met only with a soft chuckle. He froze for a second, his puzzled gaze filled with incomprehension. Eve retracted her gaze, and her hand naturally rested on Klein's back, pushing him gently. Klein didn't resist, allowing the slight force to move him from his original position. The girl's fair and nimble hand secretly and swiftly reached into Klein's outer jacket pocket. 2 fingers, pinching the paper crane's wings, pulled it out of the pocket, and with a flick of her wrist, she tossed it into the mirror world. "I didn't raise you for nothing, Zhou Mingrui. You even know to show filial respect to your older sister." Eve pushed Klein aside, revealing the packaging bag that had been blocked by him. She reached both hands into the packaging bag and took out the 2 ice creams. "Which one is mine?" Eve held up the ice creams, looked at them for a moment, then placed them back on the table. "Either is fine." Klein frowned, remained silent for a moment, then relaxed. "We can eat them together. I'll go to the kitchen to get ice cream cups and silver spoons." Eve picked up the newspapers from the table and placed them on the sofa to prevent accidental damage while they enjoyed their ice cream. "You go upstairs and find Rui. Can Rui eat ice cream?" Klein had never owned a cat in his previous life, but he knew some things. Although cats could eat ice cream, they might experience vomiting and diarrhea, so it was not recommended for health reasons. But strictly speaking, Rui isn't a complete cat either. Klein pondered in his heart. After all, other cats can't talk, but this is about diet. Rui is a demigod, so his body structure should be very different from other cats. Of course he can. From any perspective, Rui's body can beat 10 Zhou Mingrui's. Eve urged playfully, "Hurry up and go." With that, she plunged into the kitchen, rummaging through the cabinets for an ice cream cup and 3 silver spoons. The ice cream cup was made of glass, much smaller than a normal glass. The rim was scalloped, and the body resembled an unopened flower with petals curving inward. The base was similar in shape to the body, but it was a fully bloomed lily. The silver spoons appeared much plainer in comparison, but upon closer inspection, hidden ornate vine patterns could still be found. Eve casually rinsed the cups and silver spoons with clean water, then returned to the dining table with the cups in both hands. She first scooped a small portion from each ice cream ball into the miniature ice cream cups, then, holding a silver spoon, she gestured over the ice cream balls a few times, aiming for a clean, perfectly even cut. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a cane tapping on the ground was very distinct. Eve listened to the approaching sound, and only after finishing dividing the last ice cream ball did she look up and say, "All right, it's done." As she spoke, Eve pushed Klein and Rui's portions towards them, then turned and picked up a newspaper from the sofa, preparing to read it while eating ice cream. Seeing this, Klein also picked up a newspaper. There was no other way. In this world without television, mobile phones, or computers, newspapers were one of the few popular forms of entertainment for the masses. After reminiscing for a few seconds about his mobile phone, computer, and games, Klein focused his attention on the newspaper. Full-sack post. A flicker of surprise crossed Klein's eyes, but the bewilderment lasted only a moment. Although it was difficult for others to get the full-sack post in Backland, it was very simple for Eve. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.